Greetings, brave warriors and shield maidens. If you seek the strength and wisdom of the ancient Vikings, you've come to the right place. Don't waste time. Subscribe to the channel now and join our horde to strengthen this community of true Vikings. As you can see, our channel is new, so your subscription is crucial to our growth. If you're a true fan of the Vikings, show your support. Let the power of the Viking axe guide your hand to click the like button, and in the comments, tell us which city you're watching from so we know where in the world our stories are reaching, all because the night sky stretched endlessly above Asgard, a tapestry of twinkling stars and swirling galaxies. Young Odin, not yet the Allfather, sat atop the highest tower of his father's golden hall, his legs dangling over the edge as he gazed upward with wonder-filled eyes. "What secrets do you hold?" he whispered to the stars, his voice carried away by the cool night breeze. "There's so much I don't understand. So much I need to know." As if in response, a shooting star blazed across the sky, leaving a trail of sparkling dust in its wake. Odin's heart raced with excitement. He had heard tales of Mimir's well, a fount of cosmic wisdom hidden at the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. Perhaps there, he thought, he might find the knowledge he so desperately craved. The next morning, Odin approached his father, Bor, in the great hall. The older god sat upon his throne, his brow furrowed with the weight of ruling the Aesir. "Father," Odin began, his voice steady despite his nervousness, "I wish to seek out Mimir's well." Bor's eyes widened with surprise. "My son, that is a perilous journey. The well is guarded by Mimir himself, a giant of great power and cunning. Why do you wish to undertake such a quest?" Odin stood tall, his young face set with determination. "I hunger for knowledge, father. Our realm is vast, but I know there is so much more beyond our borders. If I am to be a wise ruler one day, I must understand the secrets of the cosmos." Bor studied his son for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your words show wisdom beyond your years, Odin. Very well, you may go. But be warned, Mimir does not grant his wisdom freely. The price may be steep." With his father's blessing, Odin set out on his journey. He traveled for many days and nights, crossing the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost and venturing into the wild realms beyond Asgard. The path was treacherous, filled with mist-shrouded ravines and forests of twisted ancient trees that seemed to whisper as he passed. Finally, Odin reached the base of Yggdrasil. The world tree towered above him, its branches stretching into the heavens and its roots plunging deep into the earth. There, nestled among the gnarled roots, he found a shimmering pool of water, Mimir's well. As Odin approached, a booming voice echoed around him. "Who dares to seek the waters of wisdom?" From behind the well emerged a giant figure, taller than any Odin had ever seen. Mimir, the guardian of the well, glared down at the young god with eyes that held the depth of ages. Odin swallowed hard, but stood his ground. "I am Odin, son of Bor, and I have come to drink from your well." Mimir's laughter shook the very roots of Yggdrasil. "Many have come seeking wisdom, little god. Few have been worthy, and fewer still have been willing to pay the price." "What is your price?" Odin asked, his voice unwavering. The giant's expression grew serious. "To drink from this well, you must sacrifice that which allows you to perceive the world. You must give up an eye." Odin's heart pounded in his chest. The price was indeed steep, just as his father had warned. He closed his eyes, considering the choice before him. When he opened them again, his decision was made. "I accept your terms, Mimir," Odin declared. "Wisdom is worth any price." Mimir nodded solemnly. "Very well, young Odin. Prepare yourself." What followed was a moment of excruciating pain as Odin removed his own eye. He placed it carefully in Mimir's outstretched hand, watching as the giant reverently lowered it into the well. "Now drink," Mimir commanded, gesturing to the shimmering waters. Odin knelt by the well, cupped his hands, and brought the cool liquid to his lips. As he swallowed, a rush of knowledge flooded his mind. Visions of past, present, and future swirled before him. He saw the intricate web of fate that connected all things, the hidden paths between realms, and the deep magics that underpinned creation itself. When the visions subsided, Odin found himself lying on the ground, gasping for breath. Mimir stood over him, a hint of respect in his ancient eyes. "You have paid the price and gained great wisdom, Odin, son of Bor," the giant intoned. "Use it well, for with knowledge comes great responsibility." Odin struggled to his feet, his head spinning with newfound insight. "Thank you, Mimir. I will honor this gift." The journey back to Asgard was a blur. Odin's mind raced with all he had learned, piecing together the cosmic puzzle that had eluded him before. When he finally crossed Bifrost and entered the Golden City, he found a crowd waiting for him. Whispers rippled through the gathering as they noticed his missing eye. Bor pushed through the throng, his face a mixture of concern and awe. "My son," he said, grasping Odin's shoulders. "What has happened to you?" Odin met his father's gaze, and Bor gasped at the wisdom and power now radiating from his remaining eye. "I have paid the price for knowledge, father," Odin replied, his voice resonating with newfound authority. "And I have gained so much more than I lost." The crowd fell silent, sensing the change in the young god. Odin turned to address them, his words carrying the weight of prophecy. "My people, I have seen the vastness of the cosmos and the threads of fate that bind us all. There are great challenges ahead, but also great opportunities. Together we will forge a future brighter than the stars themselves." A cheer erupted from the assembled gods, and Bor smiled proudly at his son. In that moment, they all recognized that Odin had taken his first step toward becoming the Allfather, the wisest and most powerful of all the Aesir. As the celebration began, Odin cast his gaze once more to the star-filled sky. The universe no longer seemed like a vast, unknowable expanse. Instead, it was a tapestry of wonder and possibility, waiting to be explored. Odin stood atop the highest tower of Asgard, his one eye scanning the horizon. The loss of his other eye at Mimir's well still ached, but the wisdom he'd gained was worth the sacrifice. Yet he knew there was still more to learn, more power to acquire. A gentle breeze carried the whispers of the world tree to his ears. "Odin," it seemed to say, "seek the mead of poetry." The Allfather's interest was piqued. He descended the tower, his cloak billowing behind him as he strode purposefully to the great hall. There he found Bragi, the god of poetry, strumming his harp. "Bragi," Odin called, "tell me of this mead of poetry." Bragi's fingers stilled on the strings. "Ah, you speak of Odrarir, the magical mead brewed from the blood of Kvasir. It grants the gift of poetry and wisdom to those who drink it." Odin leaned forward, intrigued. "And where might one find this mead?" "It lies deep within Jotunheim, guarded by the giant Suttung in his mountain fortress," Bragi replied, his voice low. "Many have sought it, but none have succeeded." A smile played on Odin's lips. "Then it seems I have a journey to make." Disguising himself as a wanderer, Odin set out for Jotunheim. He donned a wide-brimmed hat to shadow his face and wrapped himself in a tattered gray cloak. In his hand, he carried a gnarled staff, completing the image of a weary traveler. For 9 days and nights he journeyed through treacherous lands. Finally, he arrived at the foot of Nitbjörg, the mountain where Suttung made his home. But instead of approaching the fortress directly, Odin sought out a nearby farm. There, he found 9 servants toiling in a field, their scythes flashing in the sun as they harvested grain. Odin approached them, his voice rough with feigned exhaustion. "Good day, workers. Might an old man rest here a while?" The servants paused, eyeing him suspiciously. The eldest among them spoke. "What brings you to these parts, old one?" Odin leaned heavily on his staff. "I am but a humble wanderer, seeking work where I can find it. I've heard tell that the giant Suttung seeks strong backs for his fortress." The workers exchanged glances. "Aye, that he does," the eldest replied. "But what skills have you to offer?" From within his cloak, Odin produced a small whetstone. I may not have the strength I once did, but I can keep a blade sharp as any. Would you care for a demonstration? Curious, the workers agreed. Odin set to work, and soon their scythes gleamed like new, slicing through the grain with unprecedented ease. The servants marveled at their improved tools. By the gods, one exclaimed, you've done in moments what would take us days. Odin shrugged modestly. It's a small thing, really. But tell me, who oversees this farm? That would be Baugi Sutung's brother, the eldest worker replied. He's always looking for ways to improve the harvest. Perhaps he'd have use for your skills. As if summoned by his name, a giant appeared on the horizon. Baugi thundered towards them, his face dark with anger. What's this? He bellowed. Why have you stopped working? The servants cowered, but Odin stepped forward, bowing low. Great Baugi, forgive the interruption. I am but a humble traveler who offered to sharpen these good workers' tools. Baugi's eyes narrowed as he inspected the scythes. Impressive, he grudgingly admitted. And who might you be, traveler? I am called Bölverkr, Odin replied, using a name that meant worker of misfortune. I seek employment, if you have need of my skills. Baugi stroked his beard thoughtfully. Indeed I might. These 9 have been lazy of late. Perhaps your presence will motivate them. I'll hire you to do the work of all 9 for the rest of the season. If you succeed, I'll grant you a boon. Odin bowed again, hiding his smile. You are most generous, great Baugi. I accept your offer. And so Odin worked the fields for the rest of the summer. His disguise hid his true strength, and with his newfound wisdom, he easily completed the tasks of 9 men. As the harvest drew to a close, he approached Baugi. I have fulfilled my end of the bargain, Odin said. Now I would claim my boon. Baugi nodded reluctantly. You have indeed. Name your price, Bölverkr. Odin's eye glinted beneath the brim of his hat. I ask for a single drink of the mead your brother guards so jealously. The giant's face darkened. You ask the impossible. Sutung would never allow it. Then help me obtain it, Odin pressed. Surely as his brother you have some influence? Baugi hesitated, then sighed. Very well. I will speak to Sutung on your behalf. But I warn you, he is not easily swayed. They traveled to Hnitbjörg, where Baugi pleaded Odin's case. But Sutung was unmoved. Not a single drop shall pass any lips but mine, the giant roared. As they left the fortress, Odin turned to Baugi. Then we must find another way. Do you know where in the mountain the mead is kept? Baugi nodded. In a chamber at the heart of Hnitbjörg, but the rock is too thick to breach. Odin produced an auger from within his cloak. With this we can drill a small hole. Surely Sutung wouldn't notice that. Reluctantly, Baugi agreed. They found a suitable spot and began to drill. After hours of work, the giant declared they had broken through. But Odin was suspicious. He blew into the hole, and rock dust blew back into his face. You tried to deceive me, Baugi, he accused. Keep drilling. Chastened, Baugi continued until they truly broke through. Odin then revealed his plan. I will transform into a snake and slither through the hole. Wait for my return. Before Baugi could protest, Odin shifted his shape into that of a serpent and vanished into the mountain. Inside, he found Gunnlod, Sutung's daughter, guarding the mead. For 3 days and nights, Odin used his silver tongue to win Gunnlod's trust. On the 3rd night, she allowed him a sip from each of the 3 vessels containing the precious liquid. But Odin did not sip. He drained each vessel dry. Shifting into the form of an eagle, Odin burst from the mountain, the mead safe in his belly. Sutung, alerted by Baugi's shouts, gave chase in the form of another eagle. As they raced towards Asgard, Odin felt some of the mead threatening to escape. Rather than let it fall into Sutung's hands, he released it over Midgard, where it fell as droplets for humans to find. These scattered drops would inspire the skalds and poets of the mortal realm for generations to come. Odin soared over Asgard's walls, victorious. He had obtained the mead of poetry, cementing his position as the wisest of the gods. But as he transformed back into his godly form, he knew that this adventure, like his quest for wisdom at Mimir's well, was merely another step on his endless journey of discovery and power. The great hall of Asgard echoed with the sounds of feasting and laughter, but Odin sat silent upon his high seat, Hlidskjalf. His single eye gazed into the distance, seeing far beyond the golden walls of the god's realm. The Allfather's fingers drummed restlessly on the arm of his throne, his mind churning with an insatiable hunger for knowledge. Frigg, his wife, approached cautiously. "What troubles you, my husband? You should be celebrating your victory over Suttung and the acquisition of the mead of poetry." Odin's eye focused on her, the weight of cosmos reflected in its depth. "There is more, Frigg. Always more. I have tasted wisdom and poetry, but there are secrets still hidden from me. The runes, they called to me from the roots of Yggdrasil." Frigg's brow furrowed with concern. "The runes? But they are beyond even your reach, my love. No one, not even the Allfather, can unlock their power." A grim smile played on Odin's lips. "Not yet, but I will find a way." Without another word, Odin rose from his seat and strode from the hall, his ravens Hugin and Munin swooping down to perch on his shoulders. As he walked, his form shifted, once again taking on the appearance of a wanderer. At the edge of Asgard, where Yggdrasil's mighty branches brushed against the realm of the gods, Odin paused. He turned to his ravens. "Go, my friends," he commanded. "Fly to the far corners of the 9 worlds. Seek out any whisper, any rumor of how one might grasp the power of the runes." With a caw of acknowledgement, the birds took flight, disappearing into the cosmic mists that swirled around the world tree. For 9 days and 9 nights, Odin waited at the foot of Yggdrasil, neither eating nor drinking. His eye never left the twisting branches and roots of the great ash, searching for any sign, any clue to unlock the runic mysteries. On the 9th night, as the stars wheeled overhead and the winds of fate howled through the branches, Hugin and Munin returned. They perched on Odin's outstretched arms, their beaks clicking with urgency. "What news, my faithful ones?" Odin asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. Hugin spoke first, his voice a raspy whisper. "The runes are bound to Yggdrasil itself, Allfather. They are carved into its very essence." Munin continued, "But they will not reveal themselves to any who walk upon the earth or fly through the skies. Only one who has touched both life and death may grasp their power." Odin's eye widened with understanding. "Both life and death. I see." With grim determination, Odin drew his spear, Gungnir, from the folds of his cloak. The weapon hummed with power, sensing the momentous decision of its master. "Then I shall hang between the realms," Odin declared, "neither fully alive nor dead, until the runes reveal themselves or I am utterly destroyed." With practiced ease, Odin fashioned a noose from a strong branch of Yggdrasil. He placed it around his own neck, the rough bark scratching his skin. Then, taking a deep breath, he plunged Gungnir into his own side. Pain exploded through Odin's body as he kicked away from the branch, leaving himself suspended by the neck. Blood flowed from his wound, trickling down the trunk of Yggdrasil to its roots far below. "I dedicate myself to myself," Odin gasped, the words of ritual spilling from his lips. 9 nights I hang, wounded by spear, offered to Odin, myself to myself." Days passed in a haze of agony. Odin's throat burned with thirst, his body weakened by hunger and blood loss. Yet still he hung, his one eye searching the patterns of bark and leaf for the secrets he sought. On the 3rd day, Frigg discovered what her husband had done. She rushed to the base of Yggdrasil, her cries of anguish echoing through the realms. "Odin, my love, what madness is this? Come down, I beg you." But Odin, lost in his trance of pain and seeking, did not respond. Frigg turned to the other gods who had gathered, drawn by her cries. "We must cut him down," she pleaded. "He will die." Thor stepped forward, his mighty hammer Mjolnir in hand. "Stand back. I will break the branch and—" "No!" The voice came from above, ragged but firm. Odin's eye blazed down at them. "This is my choice, my sacrifice. None shall interfere." Reluctantly, the gods withdrew, leaving Odin to his ordeal. But Frigg remained, keeping vigil at the base of the tree, her tears watering its roots alongside her husband's blood. As the 9th day dawned, Odin's strength was all but spent. His eye had grown dim, his breathing shallow. Yet still he searched, clinging to life by sheer force of will. And then, in that moment between heartbeats, as Odin teetered on the very edge of existence, he saw them. The runes blazed to life before his fading vision, etched in lines of fire upon Yggdrasil's bark. With the last of his strength, Odin reached out, not with his hand but with his very essence. He grasped the runes, feeling their power surge through him, rewriting the very fabric of his being. Knowledge flooded his mind, the secrets of magic, the power of words, the ability to shape reality itself. Odin threw back his head and roared, his voice shaking the 9 worlds. The noose snapped, and Odin fell. But before he could strike the ground, he transformed, taking on the shape of a great eagle. He soared upward, circling Yggdrasil as his wound healed and his strength returned. Landing before the astonished gathering of gods, Odin resumed his true form. His eye now gleamed with newfound power, and the air around him crackled with mystical energy. Frigg rushed to embrace him, her face wet with tears of joy and relief. "My love, you've returned to us." Odin held her close, then addressed the assembled gods. "I have paid the price and claimed the prize. The runes are ours, and with them the power to shape our destiny." He raised his hands, and glowing symbols appeared in the air before him. "Behold, the gift I have won for gods and men alike. With these runes we shall write our fate across the cosmos." The gods cheered, but Odin's gaze was already turning inward, his mind racing with the possibilities that now lay before him. He had unlocked the secrets of the runes, but this was not an end. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter in his eternal quest for knowledge and power. As the celebration began in earnest, Odin allowed himself a small smile. The hanging tree had nearly claimed his life, but he had emerged victorious, forever changed. The great hall of Valhalla hummed with the low murmur of countless warriors, their spectral forms gathered around long tables laden with meat and mead. At the head of the hall, seated upon his high throne, Odin brooded. His single eye, gained through sacrifice at Mimir's well, gazed unseeing at the revelers before him. Thor, his red beard bristling, approached the throne. "Father," he said, his voice a rumble like distant thunder, "why do you sit alone? The Einherjar await your tales of battle and wisdom." Odin's eye focused on his son. "The 9 worlds grow vast and complex, Thor. Even with the wisdom of the well and the power of the runes, I fear there is much that escapes my sight." Rising from his throne, Odin strode to the center of the hall. The warriors fell silent, all eyes turning to the All-Father. With a wave of his hand, Odin conjured an image of Yggdrasil, the world tree, its branches spanning the cosmos. "Behold," Odin's voice rang out, "the 9 worlds that hang upon the tree. Asgard, our shining realm. Midgard, home of mortals. Jotunheim, land of giants. And more besides. But who watches these realms when my eye is turned elsewhere?" From the shadows of the hall, Loki's voice rang out, smooth as silk and sharp as a dagger. "Perhaps the Allfather's famed wisdom is not so all-encompassing after all." Odin's gaze snapped to the trickster god, but instead of anger, a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "You speak truth, Loki, though perhaps not in the way you intended. No single being, not even I, can see all. But perhaps I need not rely on my eye alone." With that, Odin raised his arms. The air around him shimmered and twisted. and from nothingness 2 massive wolves appeared. Their fur was silver and gray, their eyes gleaming with intelligence. "Behold," Odin announced, "Gary and Freki. They shall be my companions, my hunters, my guardians." The wolves padded forward, nuzzling Odin's hands before taking up positions on either side of his throne. The assembled gods and Einherjar murmured in appreciation of the magnificent beasts. But Odin was not finished. He whistled sharply, and 2 ravens, black as night, swooped down from the rafters to perch on his shoulders. "And these are Hugin and Munin, thought and memory. They have long been my eyes in the skies, but now I grant them new purpose." Odin turned to the ravens, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the hall. "Go forth, my friends. Fly to every branch of Yggdrasil, to every hidden corner of the 9 worlds. Bring me knowledge of all you see and hear." With a flurry of feathers, the ravens took flight, disappearing through an open window into the star-strewn sky of Asgard. Days passed, and Odin grew restless. He paced the halls of Valhalla, Gary and Freki padding silently at his heels. The young gods watched him with a mixture of awe and concern. Balder, fairest of the Aesir, approached his father. "You seem troubled, Allfather. Are you not confident in your raven's mission?" Odin paused, regarding his son with his penetrating gaze. "Confidence without caution is folly, my son. I have sent my thoughts and memories into the void. Until they return, I feel incomplete." As if summoned by his words, a cawing filled the air. Hugin and Munin swooped into the hall, circling once before landing on Odin's outstretched arms. Their beaks clicked rapidly as they communicated their findings directly to the Allfather's mind. Odin's face grew grave. "Troubling news," he muttered. "Stirrings in Jotunheim, whispers of discontent in Nidavellir, and in the depths of Niflheim, something awakens." The Allfather turned to the assembled gods, his voice ringing with authority. "Hear me, Aesir and Vanir. Dark times approach. We must prepare." For hours, Odin shared the knowledge gained from his ravens, outlining threats and laying plans. The young gods listened intently, asking questions and offering suggestions. Through it all, Gary and Freki stood vigilant, their keen senses alert for any danger. Gary and Freki took up their positions beside him, while Hugin and Munin settled on the armrests. Frigg approached, laying a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "You have given them much to think about, my love. Do you believe they are ready for what's to come?" Odin covered her hand with his own, his eye distant. "Ready or not, the challenges will come. But I have faith in them, Frigg. They are young, yes, but they are gods. With loyalty to each other and awareness of the worlds around them, they will face whatever fate has in store." As night fell over Asgard, Odin sat in quiet contemplation. His wolves dozed at his feet, his ravens preened on their perches. The Allfather's mind raced with possibilities, strategies, and contingencies. He had created these companions to extend his reach, to shore up his limitations. But in doing so, he had also created a powerful lesson for the gods under his protection. The 9 worlds were vast, filled with wonders and terrors beyond imagining. But with loyal friends at his side, and knowledge flowing from every realm, Odin felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The night sky over Midgard was a canvas of darkness, punctuated only by the faint glimmer of distant stars. Suddenly, the stillness was shattered by a thunderous sound, like the beating of 1,000 spectral hooves. Across the heavens, a ghostly procession materialized, led by a figure both majestic and terrifying. Odin, the Allfather, rode at the head of the wild hunt. His 8-legged steed Sleipnir galloping through the air as if it were solid ground. The god's one eye blazed with an otherworldly light, his long white beard streaming behind him. Behind Odin came a host of the dead, Einherjar chosen from the slain, their ethereal forms shimmering with an unearthly glow. "Onward!" Odin's voice boomed, carrying over the din of the hunt. "Tonight, we ride to remind the living of our power, and to seek out the worthy." The spectral host roared in response. their weapons clashing against shields in a cacophony that echoed across the 9 worlds. As they thundered across the sky, mortals below huddled in their homes, drawing blankets tight and murmuring prayers to ward off the wild hunt's attention. Suddenly, Odin raised his hand, bringing the procession to a halt. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, circled back to perch on his shoulders, cawing urgently. "What news, my faithful eyes?" Odin asked, his voice now low and intent. The ravens spoke directly to his mind, sharing visions of a dark forest and the sound of frightened voices. Odin's brow furrowed as he processed the information. "It seems our hunt has found new quarry," he announced to the waiting host. "There are lost souls below in need of our guidance." With a thought, Odin directed the wild hunt downward, descending into the depths of an ancient mist-shrouded forest. As they neared the ground, the thunderous noise of their passage faded to an eerie whisper. The trees seemed to part before them, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers in the gloom. In a small clearing, huddled around the dying embers of a campfire, sat a group of children. Their faces were streaked with tears and dirt, their eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. The oldest among them, a girl of perhaps 13 summers, clutched a crude spear fashioned from a broken branch. She leapt to her feet as Odin and his spectral host materialized from the mist. Stay back," she stammered, brandishing her makeshift weapon. "We're not afraid of you, you ghosts." Odin dismounted Sleipnir, his form shifting from the terrifying aspect of the wild hunt's leader to that of an old, one-eyed wanderer. He leaned heavily on a gnarled staff, his voice gentle as he addressed the frightened children. "Peace, young ones," he said, raising his empty hand in a gesture of goodwill. "We mean you no harm. Tell me, how came you to be lost in these treacherous woods?" The girl hesitated, then lowered her spear slightly. We were gathering herbs for our village healer. But the forest, it changed. The paths disappeared, and we've been wandering for days." Odin nodded sagely. "Ah, yes. These woods are old and full of magic. They can be deceptive to the unprepared." He looked around at the group of children, his single eye seeming to pierce through to their very souls. "But fear not, for I shall guide you home." A younger boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, piped up. "But how? We don't even know which way is home anymore." Odin knelt before the child, his eye twinkling with a mix of mischief and kindness. "Ah, but that is where courage comes in, young one, for with courage, even the darkest path becomes clear." He stood, addressing all the children. "Listen well, for I shall teach you a valuable lesson. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. Each of you has shown great bravery already, caring for one another in this dark place. Now, you must trust in that bravery to see you through." The old wanderer raised his staff, and a soft light began to glow at its tip. "Follow this light, and it will lead you true. But remember, the real guidance comes from within. Trust in yourselves and in each other." As the children gathered their meager belongings, Odin turned to his ghostly host. "The hunt must continue, but I will rejoin you once these little ones are safe." The spectral warriors nodded in understanding, fading back into the mists. Odin, still in his guise as a wanderer, led the children through the twisting paths of the forest. As they walked, he regaled them with tales of bravery and cunning, of gods and heroes who faced great challenges. The oldest girl, who had introduced herself as Sigrid, walked beside him. "These stories," she said hesitantly, "they're about the old gods, aren't they? My grandmother used to tell me such tales, but our new priests say we shouldn't believe in them." Odin chuckled softly. "Belief is a curious thing, young Sigrid. It can give strength, but it can also blind. The important thing is not whether you believe in the gods, but whether you believe in the virtues they represent. Courage, wisdom, loyalty. These are what truly matter." As they neared the edge of the forest, a fierce storm began to brew. Dark clouds roiled overhead, and thunder rumbled ominously. The children huddled closer to Odin, fear once again etching their faces. "Stand firm," Odin encouraged them. "Remember, courage is facing your fears. This storm is but another challenge to overcome." Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck a nearby tree, splitting it asunder. The children cried out in terror, but Odin stood tall, his voice rising above the tempest. "Look to each other," he commanded. "Join hands, stand together. Unity is strength, and together you can weather any storm." The children linked hands, forming a circle with Odin at its center. As the wind howled and rain lashed down, they stood their ground, drawing courage from one another. Through the chaos, Odin's voice rang out, chanting in an ancient tongue. The storm seemed to respond, its fury intensifying but somehow flowing around their small group, leaving them untouched. As suddenly as it had begun, the storm subsided. The clouds parted, revealing a starry sky, and in the distance, the twinkling lights of a village. "There," Odin said, pointing with his staff. "Your home awaits." The children cheered, their earlier fear forgotten in the joy of familiar sights. As they rushed forward, Sigrid turned back to their mysterious guide. "Thank you, old one," she said, her eyes shining with newfound wisdom. "We couldn't have made it without you." Odin smiled, his form already beginning to fade. "Remember, child, the strength was within you all along. I merely helped you find it." As the children reached the outskirts of their village, they turned for one last look at their savior. But where the old wanderer had stood, they saw only a majestic figure astride an 8-legged horse, soaring into the night sky to rejoin the spectral host that awaited him. Odin, reunited with the wild hunt, felt a sense of satisfaction. He had guided the lost, taught valuable lessons, and demonstrated the power of unity in the face of adversity. As the hunt resumed its journey across the night sky, the Allfather's thoughts turned to the challenges that lay ahead for gods and mortals alike. "Let them remember this night," he murmured to himself, "for the courage of children may well be the spark that lights our way through the darkness to come." And with that, the wild hunt thundered on, a reminder to all who witnessed it of the thin veil between the world of the living and the realm of gods and spirits, and of the enduring power of courage and unity in the face of life's greatest challenges. The sounds of hammering and sawing echoed across Asgard as the great hall of Valhalla took shape. Odin stood atop a nearby hill, his single eye surveying the construction with a mix of pride and anticipation. Beside him, the master builder, a dwarf named Fjalar, consulted a set of intricate plans. "It will be as you commanded, Allfather," Fjalar said, his voice gruff but respectful. 540 doors, each wide enough for 800 warriors to march through abreast. Odin nodded, his mind already racing ahead to the purpose of this massive undertaking. "Good. And the roof?" "Thatched with golden shields, as requested," Fjalar replied. "Though I must admit, it seems an extravagant use of—" "It is necessary," Odin interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Valhalla must shine as a beacon to all the fallen, a promise of glory and purpose beyond death." As they watched, the final golden shield was placed atop the roof, catching the light of the setting sun and transforming Valhalla into a blazing monument visible from all corners of the 9 worlds. Odin turned to Fjalar, placing a hand on the dwarf's shoulder. "You have done well, Master Builder, your payment as agreed." He handed over a small, intricately carved box. "The secrets of runecraft as promised. Use them wisely." Fjalar's eyes widened as he accepted the box, bowing deeply before scurrying away, eager to explore his new treasure. With the construction complete, Odin strode towards Valhalla's massive entrance. As he approached, 2 figures materialized beside him, the Valkyries Brynhildr and Sigrun, their armor gleaming and wings folded neatly behind them. "The first of the fallen approach, Allfather," Brynhildr reported. "They await your welcome." Odin nodded, his face solemn. "Then let us greet them, and show them the rewards of a warrior's death." The great doors of Valhalla swung open, revealing a vast hall filled with long tables and blazing hearths. At the far end, two massive trees, Laradur and Glacier, spread their branches across the ceiling, their leaves shimmering with gold. Into this splendor marched the first of the Einherjar, the chosen slain. Their spectral forms solidified as they crossed the threshold, wounds healing and vigor returning to their limbs. At their head walked a towering warrior, his beard still stained with the blood of his final battle. Odin approached him, arms spread wide in welcome. "Hail, valiant one. What name did you bear in life?" The warrior straightened, pride evident in his bearing. I was Bjorn Ironside, son of Ragnar Lothbrok. I fell in battle against the Saxons, my axe red with the blood of my enemies. Then welcome, Bjorn Ironside, to the halls of Valhalla, Odin proclaimed. Here you shall feast and fight, honing your skills for the final battle at the end of days. As more warriors filed in, Odin addressed them all, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. Hear me, Einherjar. You have proven your worth in life through your courage and skill in battle. But death is not the end of your journey. Here in Valhalla, you will prepare for Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, where your strength will be needed most. The gathered warriors cheered, raising spectral weapons in salute. Odin allowed himself a small smile before continuing. But remember this, true honor lies not just in how you fight, but in why you fight. Here you will learn to battle not for personal glory, but for the preservation of all that is good in the 9 worlds. As the Einherjar settled in, enjoying the endless mead and succulent meat provided by the magical goat Heidrun and the boar Sehrimnir, Odin made his way through the hall, speaking with individuals and small groups, gauging their character and potential. Days passed, and the routine of Valhalla established itself. Each morning, the Einherjar would march out to a great plain, where they would battle fiercely until nightfall. Then they would return to the hall, their wounds magically healed, to feast and drink until the next day's combat. But on the 7th day, as Odin sat upon his high seat overlooking the hall, a commotion broke out among the warriors. 2 groups of Einherjar faced each other, weapons drawn and voices raised in anger. Odin descended from his seat, Gary and Freki padding silently at his heels. As he approached, he recognized Bjorn Ironside at the center of one group, facing off against a fierce-looking warrior woman. What is the meaning of this? Odin's voice cut through the shouting, bringing immediate silence to the hall. Bjorn stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Allfather, this woman claims her people were justified in raiding our lands. She dishonors the memory of those we left behind. The warrior woman, her eyes flashing defiantly, replied, And was your people's expansion any less brutal, Northmen? We fought to survive just as you did. Odin raised his hand, silencing them both. His single eye seemed to pierce through their anger, seeing to the heart of the conflict. You both speak from the pain of your past lives, he said, his voice gentle but firm. But look around you. Here in Valhalla, the feuds and divisions of the mortal world have no place. You are all Einherjar now, chosen for your bravery and skill, not for the righteousness of your causes. He turned, addressing all the gathered warriors. The battles you fight here are not to relive old grudges, but to prepare for a threat that will engulf all the 9 worlds. Ragnarok approaches, a time when the forces of chaos will threaten to unmake all of creation. It is for this final battle that you train, that you prepare. Odin's eye seemed to glow with an inner fire as he continued. In that day, it will not matter what lands you came from or what gods you worshipped in life. All that will matter is your courage, your skill, and your willingness to stand together against the coming darkness. The Einherjar listened, their earlier anger fading as they absorbed the weight of Odin's words. Bjorn and the warrior woman looked at each other, then simultaneously lowered their weapons. You speak wisdom, Allfather, Bjorn said, bowing his head. I apologize for my short-sightedness. The warrior woman nodded in agreement. As do I. We have much to learn, it seems, beyond just the arts of war. Odin smiled, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. And that, my brave Einherjar, is why you are here. In Valhalla, you will not only hone your bodies for battle, but also your minds and spirits. For it is the unity of all these elements that will give us the strength to face what is to come. As the tension in the hall dissipated, replaced by a new sense of camaraderie, Odin returned to his high seat. He watched as Bjorn and the warrior woman began to talk, sharing stories of their mortal lives without rancor. Hugin and Munin, who had watched the entire scene unfold, fluttered down to perch on the arms of Odin's throne. "You have taught them well, Allfather," Hugin croaked. "But will it be enough?" Munin added, his tone somber. "Ragnarok draws ever closer." Odin stroked his beard thoughtfully, his gaze sweeping across the hall filled with laughing, feasting warriors. "It must be," he said softly, "for in their unity lies our only hope. The twilight of the gods approaches, and we must be ready to face whatever fate has in store." As night fell over Asgard, the sounds of feasting and merriment echoed from Valhalla. But beneath it all there was a new undercurrent of purpose, of warriors from all lands and times beginning to forge themselves into a unified force. And at the head of the hall, Odin watched and planned, preparing for the greatest battle yet to come. The golden halls of Asgard echoed with the thunderous footsteps of Thor as he burst into the great meeting chamber. His face was flushed with anger, Mjolnir crackling with barely contained lightning in his grip. "Father!" Thor's voice boomed across the room. "The Jötnar grow bold. They mass at our borders, probing for weaknesses." Odin, seated upon his high throne of Hlidskjalf, regarded his son with his single piercing eye. The Allfather's ravens, Hugin and Munin, cawed softly from their perches on his shoulders. "Peace, my son." Odin's voice was calm, but carried an underlying steel. "What news do you bring?" Thor paced before the throne, his agitation palpable. "Our scouts report a host of giants led by King Thrym himself. They seek the secrets of our defenses, of our magic. We must strike now before they—" "No." Odin's single word cut through Thor's tirade like a blade. "We will not rush to war, not when other paths remain open to us." The Allfather rose from his throne, his spear Gungnir materializing in his hand. "I will go to Jotunheim myself. Perhaps cooler heads can prevail, where hot blood would only lead to ruin." Thor's eyes widened in disbelief. "Father, you cannot be serious. The Jötnar cannot be trusted. They will see this as weakness." Odin placed a hand on Thor's shoulder, his eyes softening slightly. "Trust in my wisdom, my son. There are many ways to win a battle, and not all require the swing of a hammer." Before Thor could protest further, Odin strode from the chamber. As he reached the gates of Asgard, he paused, turning to address the gathering of gods and goddesses who had followed. "I go now to treat with our ancient foes," he declared. "But know this, should I not return within 3 days, you are to seal the borders of Asgard and prepare for war." With that, Odin transformed, taking on the shape of a great eagle. With powerful beats of his wings, he soared across the cosmos, crossing the boundaries between realms until the frozen wastes of Jotunheim spread out beneath him. Landing before the towering ice fortress of King Thrym, Odin resumed his godly form. Giants twice his height glowered down at him, hands gripping massive weapons of ice and stone. "I seek audience with your king," Odin announced, his voice carrying despite the howling winds. "I come under a banner of truce to speak of peace between our realms." For a long moment silence reigned. Then, with a grinding of ice, the massive gates swung open. A giant even taller than the rest emerged, his beard a tangle of icicles, his eyes gleaming with cunning. "Welcome, Allfather," King Thrym's voice rumbled like an avalanche. "What brings the mighty Odin to our humble realm? Have you perhaps come to surrender?" Odin met the giant's gaze unflinchingly. "I come to talk, Thrym. To find a way to avoid needless bloodshed between our peoples." Thrym laughed, a sound like breaking glaciers. "Talk? Very well. Let us talk. Enter, if you dare, and we shall see what words can accomplish where strength fails. The giant king led Odin into a vast hall of ice, its ceiling lost in shadows far above. As they walked, Thrym spoke, his tone deceptively casual. "You know, Allfather, we Jötnar have long memories. We remember a time when the 9 worlds were young, and our kind walked freely across all realms, before your Aesir came, with their talk of order and their thirst for power." Odin nodded sagely. "The world changes, Thrym. The old must sometimes give way to the new, but that does not mean there cannot be a place for both our peoples." They reached a long table of ice where other giant chieftains were already seated. Thrym took his place at the head, gesturing for Odin to sit opposite him. "Fine words," Thrym sneered, "but words will not satisfy the hunger of my people, nor quench their thirst for the knowledge you Aesir hoard." Odin leaned forward, his single eye gleaming in the dim light. "And what knowledge do you believe we keep from you, King of Jotunheim?" Thrym's massive fist slammed down on the table, sending cracks spiderwebbing through the ice. "Do not play coy, Odin One-Eye. We know of your runes, of the magic that flows through Asgard. Why should such power be kept from us?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled giants. Odin remained calm, his voice level as he replied, "The runes are indeed powerful, Thrym, but they are not a toy to be passed around carelessly. Even I paid a great price for their knowledge." Thrym leaned back, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Ah yes, your famous sacrifice. Hanging from the world tree, wounded by your own spear. A noble tale. But tell me, Allfather, are you willing to make such a sacrifice again? To save your precious Asgard from our wrath?" The hall fell silent, all eyes fixed on Odin. The Allfather slowly rose to his feet, his presence seeming to fill the cavernous space. "You speak of sacrifice, Thrym, but do you truly understand its meaning?" Odin's voice was soft but carried to every corner of the hall. "I hung upon Yggdrasil not for power but for wisdom. The runes are not a weapon to be wielded but a responsibility to be borne." Odin's eye swept across the assembled giants. "You hunger for knowledge? Then let me offer you this. A chance for your wisest to study in Asgard, to learn the ways of magic and runecraft under our tutelage." A shocked murmur ran through the hall. Thrym's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "And in return?" "In return," Odin continued, "you will swear a binding oath of peace. No Jotun shall raise a hand against Asgard or the other realms under our protection. Your people will have the knowledge they seek, but it will come through cooperation, not conquest." Thrym stroked his icy beard, considering. "An interesting proposal, Allfather. But how can we trust that you will honor this bargain? That you will not use our students as hostages?" Odin smiled, a glimmer of mischief in his eye. "A fair question. Perhaps a test of good faith is in order. A contest, if you will, between your greatest mind and myself. If I win, you accept my offer. If you win, I will teach you personally the secrets of the runes." The giant king's eyes lit up with interest. "A contest of wits, then? Very well, Odin. I accept your challenge. Bring forth our wisest." From the shadows stepped a giantess, her hair white as snow, her eyes deep pools of ancient knowledge. "I am Gunnlod," she announced, "and I will match wits with the Allfather." Odin bowed slightly to Gunnlod. "Then let us begin. A riddle contest, perhaps. 3 riddles each with the best of 5 declared the winner." And so began an epic battle of minds. Gunnlod's riddles were clever and steeped in the lore of Jotunheim, but Odin's vast wisdom allowed him to unravel each one. In turn, the Allfather posed riddles that drew upon knowledge from across the 9 worlds. As the final round approached, the score stood even. Gunnlod leaned forward, her voice carrying a hint of triumph as she posed her last riddle. "What force can shake the foundations of Yggdrasil, yet leave no trace of its passing?" Odin stroked his beard thoughtfully, then smiled. "Thought," he answered. "For it is the power of mind that can reshape reality, yet leave no physical mark." Gunnlod's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in resignation. She nodded, conceding defeat. Thrym rose to his feet, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "It seems, Allfather, that you have won our contest. Very well. We will accept your offer of peace and education." Odin extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Thrym clasped it in his own massive grip. "Then let it be so," Odin declared. "A new era of understanding between Asgard and Jotunheim begins today." As Odin prepared to depart, Gunnlod approached him. "You are as wise as the legends say, Allfather," she said softly. "I look forward to learning from you and your kin." Odin smiled warmly. "And I look forward to the day when Aesir and Jötnar can share knowledge freely, without fear or mistrust." With a final nod to Thrym, Odin once again took on his eagle form and soared back towards Asgard. As he flew, his mind was already racing with plans for this new alliance, and the challenges that lay ahead in maintaining it. But for now, at least, the threat of war had been averted. Odin had proven once again that wisdom and cunning could accomplish what brute force could not. As the golden spires of Asgard came into view, the Allfather allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The 9 worlds were changing, and with change came both danger and opportunity. It would take all of his skill to navigate the path ahead, but Odin was ready for the challenge. The forges of Nidavellir roared with an intensity that shook the very foundations of the dwarven realm. Sparks flew like stars, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of molten metal and magic. In the heart of this inferno stood Odin, the Allfather, his single eye gleaming with anticipation. Before him, dwarven mastersmiths Brock and Eitri labored over an anvil of pure starstone. Their hammers fell in perfect rhythm, each blow sending showers of multicolored sparks cascading across the workshop. "It must be perfect," Odin's voice carried over the din of the forge. "Gungnir shall be more than a weapon. It shall be a symbol of my authority, a conduit for my will across the 9 worlds." Brock paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow with a soot-stained hand. "We understand, Allfather, but you must realize, what you ask is no simple task. To forge a spear that never misses its mark, that can channel your very thoughts. It pushes the boundaries of even our considerable skill." Eitri nodded in agreement, his beard smoldering slightly from the heat of the forge. "We've gathered materials from across the cosmos. The shaft is hewn from a branch of Yggdrasil itself. The spearhead we forged from Uru, the rarest and most magical of metals. But the enchantments required, they are complex beyond measure." Odin's eye narrowed slightly. "I have faith in your abilities, Master Dwarves. Your works are legendary across the realms. Surely Gungnir will be your crowning achievement." The brothers exchanged a glance, pride and determination hardening their features. "It shall be done, Allfather," Brock declared. "No matter the cost, no matter the challenge, we will create a weapon worthy of your hand." As the dwarves returned to their labor, Odin stepped back, allowing them space to work their craft. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, perched on a nearby anvil, their beady eyes fixed on the proceedings. Days passed, each bringing new challenges. The Uru metal proved resistant to traditional forging techniques, requiring the dwarves to innovate new methods on the spot. The branch of Yggdrasil pulsed with its own life force, making it difficult to shape and bond with the spearhead. On the 7th day, as Brock and Eitri neared completion of their masterpiece, disaster struck. A sudden tremor shook the forge, causing Eitri to stumble as he carried a crucible of molten Uru. The precious metal spilled across the floor, hissing and steaming. "No!" Brock cried out in anguish. "Brother, are you hurt?" Eitri waved off his concern, his eyes fixed on the ruined metal. "I'm fine, but the Uru, we've lost nearly half our supply. Without it, Gungnir will be unbalanced, imperfect." A low chuckle echoed from the shadows of the forge. Odin's head snapped around, his eye narrowing as a familiar figure sauntered into view. "Such a shame." Loki's voice dripped with false sympathy. "All that work, all that precious metal, Wasted. Perhaps this is a sign that Gungnir is not meant to be a Allfather? Odin regarded the trickster god coolly. An interesting coincidence, Loki, that you should appear at this precise moment. One might almost suspect interference. Loki placed a hand over his heart in mock offense. Me? Interfere with the great works of our dwarven friends? I'm wounded by the very suggestion. I merely came to observe the creation of this legendary weapon. Although, he added with a sly grin, if the project is doomed to failure, perhaps we should consider alternative arrangements. I know of a certain frost giant who would pay handsomely for even an imperfect version of Gungnir. Before Odin could respond, Eitri's voice rang out, filled with renewed determination. No, we will not be defeated so easily. Brother, bring me the shavings and scraps from our earlier work. We'll reforge them, mix them with what remains of the pure Uru. It will be difficult, but not impossible. Brock finished, already gathering the precious remnants. Odin turned back to Loki, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It seems your concerns are premature, Loki. Gungnir will be forged as intended. Loki's eyes narrowed, but he kept his tone light. Of course, of course. Far be it from me to doubt the skills of our esteemed dwarven craftsmen. I'll just observe from here, shall I? As Loki retreated to a corner of the forge, Odin approached the dwarves. You show great resilience, my friends. Know that your efforts are appreciated. Brock nodded grimly, already stoking the fires of the forge to even greater heights. We'll not let a minor setback defeat us, Allfather. Gungnir will be everything you dreamed, and more. For 3 more days and nights the dwarves labored without rest. They poured not just their skill, but their very essence into the creation of Gungnir. Runes of power were etched into its length, enchantments woven into its very being. Finally, as the fires of the forge began to dim, Brock and Eitri stood back, exhaustion and pride warring on their faces. It is done, Eitri announced, his voice hoarse from the smoke and exertion. Odin stepped forward, his eye fixed on the spear that floated above the anvil, pulsing with barely contained power. Reverently, he reached out and grasped Gungnir's shaft. The moment his hand closed around the weapon, a surge of energy coursed through him. Odin's eye blazed with an inner fire, and for a moment the very fabric of reality seemed to bend around him. Magnificent, he breathed, testing the perfect balance of the spear. You have outdone yourselves, my friends. Gungnir is everything I hoped for and more. Loki, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, stepped forward. Very pretty, he said dismissively. But does it actually work as promised? A spear that never misses its mark is a bold claim after all. Odin's eye flickered to the trickster god, a dangerous glint in its depths. You wish for a demonstration, Loki? Without waiting for a response, Odin turned and hurled Gungnir towards the far wall of the forge. The spear streaked through the air, then suddenly curved, weaving between pillars and around obstacles. It struck a small amulet hanging on the far wall, piercing it cleanly before reversing course and returning to Odin's waiting hand. Loki's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his face. Most impressive, Allfather. Odin nodded, then turned back to the dwarves. You have my thanks, Brock and Eitri. Your payment, as agreed. He handed over a small, intricately carved box. The secrets of gravity manipulation, as practiced in Asgard. Use them wisely. As they emerged from the forges of Nidavellir, Gungnir gleaming in Odin's grasp, they found a group of young gods waiting. Thor, Balder, and others looked on in awe at the newly forged weapon. Father? Thor's voice boomed with excitement. Is that the legendary Gungnir? May we see it in action? Odin regarded his son thoughtfully, then addressed the gathered gods. Gungnir is indeed powerful, a weapon without equal. But remember this, my children, great power brings with it great responsibility. He raised the spear, its tip gleaming in the ethereal light of Asgard. This is not a tool for mindless destruction or petty squabbles. It is a symbol of authority, of the wisdom needed to rule justly. In your hands, such a weapon could bring ruin as easily as victory. Balder stepped forward, his face serious. Then teach us, Father. Show us how to wield power with wisdom, how to balance strength with responsibility. Odin smiled, pride shining in his eye. Well spoken, my son. Come then, all of you. Let us begin your lesson, for in learning to use Gungnir wisely, you will learn what it truly means to be a leader of gods and men. As Odin began to instruct the young gods, demonstrating the power and precision of Gungnir, Hugin and Munin exchanged knowing looks. The weapon was more than just a spear. It was a teaching tool, a means for Odin to shape the next generation of Aesir. And in the shadows, unnoticed, Loki watched. His mind raced with possibilities, both for mischief and for power. The great hall of Valhalla trembled, its golden walls shaking with each thunderous howl that echoed across Asgard. Odin stood at the head of the long table, his face grim as he surveyed the assembled gods. Thor's fingers tightened around Mjolnir's handle, while Tyr's hand rested uneasily on his sword hilt. The situation can no longer be ignored. Odin's voice cut through the tense silence. Fenrir has grown too powerful, too unpredictable. Each day, he threatens the very foundations of our realm. Freya, her golden hair shimmering in the torchlight, leaned forward. But Allfather, is he not Loki's offspring? Surely there must be some way to reason with the beast. A bitter laugh rang out from the shadows. Loki stepped into the light, his eyes glinting with a mixture of pride and concern. Reason? With Fenrir? My dear Freya, you clearly haven't spent much time around my charming son. He knows only hunger and the joy of destruction. Thor slammed his fist on the table, causing goblets to rattle. Then we should face him in battle. Let us put an end to this threat once and for all. Odin raised his hand, silencing the growing murmurs of agreement. No, my son. Fenrir's strength grows daily. Even our combined might may not be enough to defeat him in open combat. We must use cunning where brute force would fail. The Allfather's single eye swept across the gathered gods, finally settling on Tyr. You have spent the most time with Fenrir, have you not? Gained a measure of his trust? Tyr nodded slowly, his face troubled. I have, Allfather. I've watched him grow from a pup, tried to teach him our ways, but his wild nature cannot be tamed. His power, it's like nothing I've ever seen. Odin stroked his beard thoughtfully. Then it is you who must play the crucial role in what is to come, for I have devised a plan to bind Fenrir, to contain his threat before it's too late. The god produced a slender ribbon, seemingly delicate yet shimmering with barely contained power. This is Gleipnir, forged by the dwarves using materials that should not exist. The sound of a cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. Loki leaned in, his eyes widening with grudging admiration. Impressive, Allfather, but how do you propose to get my son to accept being bound by such a thing? He's not exactly known for his cooperative nature. A grim smile played at the corners of Odin's mouth. That, Loki, is where our skills of persuasion come into play. We shall make it a game, a test of Fenrir's legendary strength. As Odin outlined his plan, the faces of the assembled gods grew serious. They knew the risks, understood the price that might need to be paid, but the threat Fenrir posed was too great to ignore. The next day, as the sun rose over Asgard, a group of gods approached the clearing where Fenrir made his lair. The massive wolf raised his head, yellow eyes gleaming with intelligence and suspicion. Well, well. Fenrir's voice was a low growl that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest gods. To what do I owe the pleasure of such esteemed company? Odin stepped forward, Gleipnir hidden within the folds of his cloak. Greetings, mighty Fenrir. We come with a challenge, a test worthy of your great strength. Fenrir's ears pricked up with interest. A challenge? Do tell, Allfather. It's been so long since I've had any real entertainment. Tyr moved to stand beside Odin, forcing a smile onto his face. We've brought bindings, each stronger than the last. We wish to see if there are any that can hold you, even for a moment. The great wolf's laugh shook the trees around them. Bindings? For me? Oh, this should be amusing. Very well, I accept your challenge. But be warned, I'll not make it easy for you. And so the test began. First, they brought forth heavy iron chains, which Fenrir snapped as if they were twine. Next came enchanted shackles glowing with runes of containment. These lasted barely a heartbeat before shattering under the wolf's strength. With each failure, Fenrir's confidence grew. His massive tail wagged with amusement, his eyes glinting with mockery. Is this truly the best you can do? I expected more from the mighty gods of Asgard. Finally, Odin produced Gleipnir. The slender ribbon seemed to shimmer and shift in the sunlight, never quite the same from one moment to the next. Fenrir's eyes narrowed as he regarded the strange binding. And what is this supposed to be? You expect to hold me with a ribbon? Loki, who had been watching silently from the sidelines, stepped forward. Come now, my son. Surely you're not afraid of a little silk, or perhaps you doubt your own strength? The taunt had its intended effect. Fenrir bristled, his hackles rising. Afraid? I fear nothing, least of all some dwarf-spun thread, but... He paused, a cunning light entering his eyes. I sense magic here, trickery perhaps. I'll not be made a fool of. If you want me to submit to this binding, one of you must place your hand in my mouth, a guarantee of good faith, as it were. A tense silence fell over the gathering. The gods exchanged uneasy glances, each unwilling to take such a risk. Then, with a deep breath, Tyr stepped forward. I'll do it, he declared, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Fenrir knows me. He knows I would not participate in treachery against him. Odin's eye widened in surprise and grudging admiration. Tyr, you understand what this may cost you? Tyr nodded grimly. I do, All-Father, but for the safety of Asgard, for the 9 worlds, it's a price I'm willing to pay. Slowly, with deliberate movements, Tyr approached Fenrir. The great wolf's jaws parted, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Tyr placed his right hand between those fearsome jaws, feeling the hot breath of the beast on his skin. There, Tyr said, his voice only slightly strained. Now, mighty Fenrir, will you submit to the binding? Fenrir considered for a moment, then nodded his massive head. Very well. Bring your ribbon, gods. Let us see what it can do. With swift movements, the gods wrapped Gleipnir around Fenrir's massive form. The ribbon seemed to grow and stretch, encompassing the wolf's entire body. As the final knot was tied, there was a flash of blinding light and a sound like thunder. Fenrir's eyes widened in shock and growing rage as he realized he could not break free. He thrashed and strained against Gleipnir, but the magical binding held firm. Treachery, Fenrir roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of Asgard. You have tricked me, betrayed me. In his fury, Fenrir's jaws clamped shut. Tyr let out a cry of agony as the wolf's teeth severed his hand at the wrist. Blood flowed freely, staining the ground crimson. Odin rushed to Tyr's side, pressing a hand to the wound to staunch the bleeding. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten, brave Tyr. Songs will be sung of your courage for ages to come. As the other gods secured Fenrir, ensuring he could not escape his magical prison, Odin's face was troubled. He had achieved his goal. The threat of Fenrir was contained. But at what cost? The trust between gods and giants, already fragile, was now irreparably damaged. And Tyr, one of his most loyal followers, had paid a terrible price. Loki approached, his face a mask of cold fury. Well, All-Father, I hope you're satisfied. You've bound my son and maimed one of your own. A great victory for Asgard, no doubt. Odin met Loki's gaze steadily. It was necessary, Loki, for the good of all the realms. Necessary? Loki spat the word. Remember this day, Odin One Eye. Remember the price of your necessity, for I promise you, there will come a reckoning. As Loki stalked away, and the other gods tended to Tyr's wound, Odin stood alone, watching as Fenrir was dragged away to his new prison. The Allfather's mind was heavy with the weight of his decision, and the knowledge that this was but one move in a greater game. The binding of Fenrir had secured Asgard for now, but it had also set in motion events that would echo through the 9 worlds. The great hall of Valhalla, once a place of feasting and merriment, now echoed with hushed whispers and the nervous shuffling of feet. The Einherjar, chosen warriors of the slain, stood silent and watchful along the walls, their spectral forms tense with anticipation. At the head of the long table sat Odin, the All-Father, his single eye gazing into the distance, seeing far beyond the golden walls of Asgard. Thor, his red beard bristling with barely contained energy, was the first to break the oppressive silence. Father, we can no longer ignore the signs. The Midgard serpent stirs in the depths, Fenrir strains against his bonds, and the giants sharpen their blades. Ragnarok approaches. Odin's eye focused on his son, a weary smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Indeed, Thor, the twilight of the gods is upon us, but tell me, what do you propose we do? Before Thor could respond, Freya stepped forward, her golden hair shimmering in the torchlight. We must fight, of course. Gather our forces, fortify Asgard. Surely with our combined might we can... Can what? Loki's mocking voice cut through the hall like a knife. The trickster god lounged in a shadowy corner, his eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and something darker. Forestall the inevitable? Change the very fabric of fate? Oh, my dear gods, how little you've learned. Odin raised a hand, silencing the angry murmurs that rippled through the assembly. Loki speaks a harsh truth, though perhaps not in the way he intends. Ragnarok is not merely a battle to be won or lost. It is the end of an age, and the birth of something new. The Allfather stood, his presence seeming to fill the vast hall. I have wandered the 9 worlds, sacrificed and suffered to gain wisdom. Now, as we stand on the brink of twilight, I will share that wisdom with you. He turned to Thor, placing a hand on his son's broad shoulder. You speak of battle, my son, and indeed battle will come, but true strength lies not in the swing of a hammer or the clash of swords. It lies here, he tapped Thor's chest, in the heart that beats for something greater than itself. Next, Odin addressed Freya. And you, dear Freya, speak of fortifications and defenses, but the strongest walls are not built of stone or magic. They are forged in the bonds between us, in the unity of purpose that binds us together. The Allfather's gaze swept across the assembled gods, each feeling the weight of his single eye upon them. I have hung from Yggdrasil, wounded and alone, to gain the knowledge of the runes. I have traded my eye for a drink from Mimir's well of wisdom. And do you know what I have learned, above all else? Balder, fairest of the Aesir, stepped forward. Tell us, Father, what wisdom can guide us through the darkness that approaches? Odin smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across his weathered features. That our strength lies not in our godhood, but in our values. Courage, honor, sacrifice. These are the qualities that will light our way through the long night ahead. He gestured to the Einherjar lining the walls. Look at these warriors. They have already tasted death, yet they stand ready to fight again. Why? Because they believe in something greater than themselves. They understand that it is not the years in your life that matter, but the life in your years. A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Even Loki, despite his ever-present smirk, seemed to be listening intently. Odin continued, his voice gaining strength. Ragnarok may be our destiny, but how we face it, that is our choice. We can cower in fear, or we can stand tall, embodying the very virtues we have long championed. He drew Gungnir, his mighty spear, its tip gleaming with an inner light. This weapon, forged by the dwarves and imbued with great power, is formidable, but it is not the source of my strength. My strength comes from the wisdom gained through sacrifice, the bonds forged with each of you, and the unwavering belief in the values we uphold." Thor stepped forward, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "But Father, if Ragnarok is inevitable, what hope do we have? Are we merely playing out a predetermined script?" Odin's eye twinkled with a mixture of mischief and deep knowing. "Ah, my son, the future is ever in motion. Yes, the prophecies speak of our fall, but they also speak of renewal, of a world reborn from the ashes of the old. Our actions, here and now, will shape that new world." He turned, addressing all the assembled gods. "Each of you has a role to play in the coming battle, but more importantly, each of you has wisdom to impart, values to uphold. In the face of darkness, be a light. In the grip of fear, be a beacon of courage, for it is not just our lives at stake, but the very essence of what we represent." Tyr, the one-handed god of war and justice, raised his voice. "And what of sacrifice, Allfather? I gave my hand to bind Fenrir. What more will be asked of us?" Odin's face softened as he regarded Tyr. "Your sacrifice was great, brave Tyr, and it will not be the last we face. But remember, it is our willingness to sacrifice, to put the greater good above our own desires, that makes us worthy of the mantle of godhood." As if in response to Odin's words, a deep horn blast echoed across Asgard. The gods tensed, hands reaching for weapons. The Einherjar straightened, spectral armor gleaming as they prepared for battle. Odin stood tall, Gungnir held high. And so it begins. The twilight of the gods is upon us. But remember my words, sons and daughters of Asgard. Our strength lies not in our power, but in our unity. Our hope rests not in victory, but in the legacy we leave behind. He strode towards the great doors of Valhalla, the other gods falling in behind him. We go now to face our destiny, but we do so not as mere gods, but as embodiments of the values we have long championed. Courage, honor, wisdom, sacrifice, let these be our watchwords in the dark days ahead. As the doors swung open, revealing the gathering storm beyond, Odin turned one last time to address his fellow gods. Remember, it is not the destination that defines us, but the journey, and what a journey it has been, my friends. Now let us write its final chapter with deeds that will echo through eternity. With a roar of defiance and determination, the gods of Asgard surged forward, led by their Allfather. The first battles of Ragnarok lay before them, but they faced them not with fear, but with the quiet confidence of those who know their true strength. And as the storm broke over Asgard, as giants and monsters clashed with gods and heroes, Odin's wisdom rang true. For in those desperate hours it was not godly power that turned the tide, but the all-too-human qualities of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. The twilight of the gods had come, but with it came the dawn of a new age. An age shaped not by the whims of fate, but by the values and choices of those who dared to stand against the darkness. And in that truth lay the greatest wisdom of all, that even in the face of destiny, it is our choices that define us. The great hall of Ravenholt buzzed with the sounds of celebration. Torches flickered along the rough-hewn walls, casting dancing shadows over the gathered villagers. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, spilled mead, and the sweat of bodies pressed close in revelry. At the center of it all stood Bjorn, a gangly youth of 15 summers, his eyes fixed upon the figure commanding everyone's attention. The Skald, an old man with a silver beard and piercing blue eyes, raised his arms dramatically. His voice, strong despite his years, rang out across the hall. Hear now the tale of Ragnar the Bold, who sailed the seas with warriors of old. His axe sang death, his ship cut the waves. To glory and riches these northern braves. Bjorn felt his heart race as the Skald's words painted vivid images in his mind. He could almost taste the salt spray, feel the deck roll beneath his feet. The boy's fingers twitched, itching to grasp a pen, to capture some fragment of this magic for himself. "Lad, where's that ale?" The gruff voice of his father, Storie the Strong, cut through Bjorn's reverie. He startled, nearly dropping the jug he'd forgotten he was holding. "Sorry, father," Bjorn mumbled, hurrying to refill Sturkar's horn. Sturkar grunted, taking a long pull of ale before wiping his beard with the back of his hand. He glanced at his son, noting the boy's distraction. "You're mooning over that old fool again, aren't you?" he said, his voice a low rumble of disapproval. Bjorn felt his cheeks flush. "He's not a fool, father. Skald Halfdan is respected throughout the north. They say even King Harald values his counsel." Sturkar snorted. "Counsel? Prattling on about long-dead heroes won't feed a family or defend our shores. You'd do better to focus on your axe work. Your swing is still weak as a newborn calf's." The boy's shoulders slumped, but he dared not argue further. He knew his father's mind on the matter. A real man was a warrior, not some wandering storyteller. But as the Skald's voice rose again, weaving tales of legendary battles and tragic love, Bjorn couldn't help but be drawn in once more. As the night wore on and the mead flowed freely, Bjorn found himself drifting to the edges of the gathering. He slipped out a side door, gulping in the crisp night air. The stars glittered overhead, and in the distance, he could hear the soft lapping of waves against the shore. Without conscious thought, his feet carried him down the worn path to the water's edge. Here, away from the press of the village, Bjorn felt he could breathe. He settled onto a familiar rock, smoothed by centuries of wind and water, and gazed out over the dark expanse of the fjord. Words bubbled up within him, demanding release. Softly at first, then with growing confidence, Bjorn began to speak. "Silent stars watch o'er the sleeping land, while dreams of glory stir in hearts so grand. But what of those whose battles rage within, whose victories are wrought by quill, not skin? Not bad, young one, though your meter could use some work." Bjorn leapt to his feet, startled by the unexpected voice. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall and lean, wrapped in a travel-stained cloak. As the stranger stepped into the moonlight, Bjorn recognized him as the wandering skald who had arrived in the village that morning. I'm sorry," Bjorn stammered. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." The skald waved away his apology with a smile. "No disturbance at all. I often find the quiet of night more conducive to composing than the clamor of day." He cocked his head, regarding Bjorn with curiosity. "You have a gift, lad. Raw, untrained, but there's power in your words." Bjorn felt a surge of pride, quickly tempered by the memory of his father's disdain. "Thank you, but it doesn't matter. I'm to be a warrior, like my father." The skald's eyebrows rose. "And who decided that? You? Or someone else?" "My father says—" "Ah," the skald interrupted gently. "But what do you say, Bjorn?" The use of his name startled the boy. "How did you—" "A skald's business is knowing things," the man said with a wink. "Now answer the question. What path would you choose if the choice were truly yours?" Bjorn hesitated, torn between ingrained obedience and the yearning in his heart. Finally, the words spilled out in a rush. "I want to be like Skald Halfdan. I want my words to move people, to inspire them. I want to keep our stories alive so we never forget where we came from." The skald nodded, a pleased expression on his face. "A noble aspiration, and one I believe you have the talent to achieve." He paused, seeming to weigh a decision. "I'm journeying south when the tide turns. I could use an apprentice, someone to carry my harp and learn the old tales." Bjorn's heart leapt, but reality quickly dampened his excitement. "My father would never allow it." "Perhaps, but you're nearly a man grown. The choice ultimately is yours." The skald placed a hand on Bjorn's shoulder. "Think on it. If you decide to follow this path, meet me at the docks before first light. If not, well, may the gods smile upon whatever road you choose." With that, the skald melted back into the shadows, leaving Bjorn alone with his turbulent thoughts. The next morning dawned gray and misty. Bjorn had barely slept, his mind churning with the weight of the decision before him. He crept from his bed, gathering the few possessions he treasured most: a small knife, a handful of copper coins, and a bone comb that had belonged to his mother. As he reached for the door, a gruff voice froze him in place. "And just where do you think you're going?" Bjorn turned slowly to face his father. Sturkar stood with arms crossed, his face a mask of disapproval. "Father, Bjorn swallowed hard, squaring his shoulders. "I'm leaving. With the skald. I want to learn the old tales to become a skald myself." Sturkar's face darkened like a thundercloud. "Absolutely not. No son of mine will waste his life spouting pretty words while real men do the fighting." "But father—" "Enough," Sturkar roared. "You'll stay here and learn to be a proper warrior, or by Odin's eye I'll—" "You'll what?" Bjorn interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. "Beat me? Lock me away? I am not a child anymore, father. I respect you, but this is my life, my choice." For a long moment, father and son stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Sturkar spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "If you walk out that door, you are no longer my son. Do you understand? You'll be dead to me." Bjorn felt as if he'd been struck. He had expected anger, but this was beyond what he had imagined. And yet, even as pain lanced through him, he knew his path was set. "I understand," he said softly. "I'm sorry, father. I truly am. But I have to do this." Without waiting for a response, Bjorn turned and walked out the door. He didn't look back, knowing that if he did, his resolve might crumble. Instead, he set his eyes on the misty harbor, where a ship waited to carry him towards an uncertain future. As he approached the docks, he saw the wandering skald standing near a sleek longship. The man's face broke into a smile as he caught sight of Bjorn. "Ah, young Bjorn, you've made your choice, I see." Bjorn nodded, not trusting himself to speak just yet. The skald's expression softened with understanding. "The path of a skald is not an easy one, lad, but for those with the gift there is no other way to truly live." He gestured towards the ship. "Come. The tide waits for no man, and we have much ground to cover." As Bjorn set foot on the ship that would carry him away from everything he'd ever known, he felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration. He cast one last look at the village of his birth, half expecting to see his father's hulking form watching from the shore. But there was only mist, and the cries of seabirds. Taking a deep breath, Bjorn turned his face towards the open sea and whatever adventures lay ahead. In his heart, a verse began to form, the first of many that would shape his journey from a boy with a dream to a skald worthy of legend. The longship cut through the choppy waves, its dragon-headed prow rising and falling with each swell. Bjorn stood at the stern, his knuckles white as he gripped the gunwale. The coast of his homeland had long since faded into the mist, yet he couldn't tear his eyes away from the horizon. "You won't see it again, lad," came the gravelly voice of Skald Eirik, his new mentor. "Not for a long while, at least." Bjorn nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I know," he said, his voice barely audible over the crash of waves and the creak of oars. Eirik clapped a hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's never easy leaving home, but sometimes it's necessary." He paused, studying Bjorn's face. "You're not having second thoughts, are you?" "No," Bjorn said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "It's just, I keep seeing my father's face, the way he looked at me when I left." Eric's expression softened. "Ah, yes, Sturkar the Strong. I've heard tales of his stubbornness. It rivals even the mountains themselves." He sighed. "Give him time, lad. He may come around yet." Bjorn wanted to believe it, but the memory of his father's final words echoed in his mind. "You are no longer my son." He shook his head, trying to dispel the thought. "Now then," Eric said, his tone brightening. "Let's see what you can do with a verse about our journey so far. Something to capture the spirit of adventure, eh?" Bjorn nodded, grateful for the distraction. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of the ship and sea wash over him. After a moment, he began. "Wood creaks, salt spray flies, dragon ship cleaves the skies. Home behind, unknown ahead, adventure calls, fear we've shed." Eric nodded approvingly. Not bad at all. You've a good ear for rhythm. We'll work on your imagery next. The best skalds can make their audience feel as if they're right there in the story." As the day wore on, the weather began to change. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain. "Looks like we're in for some rough weather," Eric muttered, eyeing the sky warily. The captain, a grizzled veteran named Håkon, barked orders to his crew. "Secure the cargo, reef the sail, move your arses, you lazy sons of thralls." Bjorn watched in awe as the seasoned sailors sprang into action. He felt useless, unsure of how to help. "Here, lad," Eric said, pressing a bucket into his hands. "Start bailing. We'll need all hands for this." The storm hit with a fury that took Bjorn's breath away. Rain lashed the deck, driven sideways by howling winds. Waves as tall as the mast threatened to swamp the ship. Bjorn bailed water frantically, his arms burning with the effort. "By Thor's hammer," he gasped. "I've never seen such a storm." Eirik, looking far too calm for Bjorn's liking, grinned. This is but a summer squall, boy. Wait till you've seen a real tempest." A massive wave crashed over the side, nearly sweeping Bjorn off his feet. As he struggled to regain his balance, he heard a shout from the bow. "Man overboard." Without thinking, Bjorn dropped his bucket and rushed to the side. He could just make out a figure in the churning water, arms flailing desperately. "Bjorn, no!" Eric yelled, but it was too late. The young skald had already dove into the raging sea. The cold hit him like a hammer blow, driving the air from his lungs. For a moment, he was lost in a world of swirling darkness. Then his survival instincts kicked in, and he clawed his way to the surface. Gasping for air, Bjorn searched frantically for the drowning sailor. He spotted him a few yards away and struck out with powerful strokes. Reaching the man, he grabbed him around the chest. "I've got you," Bjorn shouted over the roar of the storm. "Hold on." A rope splashed down nearby, a lifeline from the ship. With the last of his strength, Bjorn seized it. Slowly, agonizingly, they were pulled back to safety. As they were hauled aboard, Bjorn collapsed on the deck, coughing up seawater. Eric was at his side in an instant, wrapping a blanket around his shivering shoulders. "You damn fool," the older skald muttered, but there was pride in his voice. "That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen." The rescued sailor, a young man not much older than Bjorn, clasped his hand. "Thank you," he said fervently. "I owe you my life." Håkon stomped over, his face a storm to rival the one raging around them. "That was a reckless thing you did, boy," he growled. Then his expression softened slightly. "But well done. You've got the makings of a true Viking in you, skald or no." As quickly as it had come, the storm passed. The crew set about repairing what damage they could, and soon the ship was back on course. Bjorn, exhausted but exhilarated, found himself the center of attention as the other sailors clapped him on the back and offered him drinks. Days later, they finally caught sight of land. The busy port of Hedeby sprawled before them, a forest of masts and a jumble of wooden buildings crowding the shoreline. Bjorn's eyes widened as they drew closer. He had never seen so many ships, so many people in one place. The noise and bustle were overwhelming after the relative quiet of the voyage. As they disembarked, Eric noticed Bjorn's hesitation. "Quite a sight, isn't it? Hedeby is the crossroads of the north. You'll find goods and stories from every corner of the known world here." They made their way through the crowded streets, Bjorn's head swiveling as he tried to take in everything at once. Merchants hawked their wares in a dozen different languages. The air was thick with the scents of spices, leather, and smoke. "Come," Eric said, guiding Bjorn towards a large building. "The Jarl is holding a feast tonight. It's time for your first real performance as a skald." Bjorn felt his stomach lurch. "But I'm not ready," he protested. Eric's eyes twinkled. "No one ever is, lad. But you'll never get ready if you don't start somewhere." The great hall was packed with warriors, merchants, and nobles. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of roasted meat. Bjorn's palms were slick with sweat as he waited for his turn to perform. When Eric finally introduced him, Bjorn stepped forward on shaky legs. He took a deep breath and began to recite the verse he had prepared, a tale of their storm-tossed journey. But as he spoke, he realized something was wrong. The words that had sounded so fine in his head now fell flat. The audience began to shift restlessly, their attention wandering. One drunken warrior called out, "Is this a skald or a mewling babe?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Bjorn felt his face burning with shame. He stumbled over his words, lost his place, and finally fell silent. The hall erupted in jeers and catcalls. Bjorn fled, pushing his way through the crowd and out into the cool night air. He didn't stop running until he reached the docks, where he collapsed, fighting back tears of humiliation. He didn't know how long he sat there before he felt a hand on his shoulder. Looking up, he saw Eric standing over him. "I'm sorry," Bjorn choked out. "I've dishonored you. I'm not fit to be a skald." Eric sat down beside him with a grunt. "Nonsense," he said. "Every great skald has known failure. It's how we learn." "But I forgot everything you taught me," Bjorn protested. The words, "They had no power." Eric was silent for a long moment, gazing out over the dark water. Finally, he spoke. "There's something I haven't told you about the true power of our craft, Bjorn. Something few outside the skalds know." Bjorn looked up, curiosity overcoming his misery. "The words themselves are not the source of our power," Eric continued. "They are merely the vessel. The true power comes from within." He tapped Bjorn's chest. "From here, from your experiences, your passions, your very soul." "I don't understand," Bjorn said, frowning. "You will," Eric assured him. "In time. For now, know this. The greatest verses are born not from mere skill, but from life itself. Your humiliation tonight, your bravery during the storm, these are the seeds from which true poetry grows." As Eric's words sank in, Bjorn felt a spark of hope rekindle in his chest. He nodded slowly, a determined glint coming into his eye. "I want to try again," he said. Eric smiled. "And so you shall. Tomorrow is another day, and another chance to find your voice." He stood, offering Bjorn a hand up. "Come, let's find some ale and plot your triumphant return." As they walked back towards the bustling town, Bjorn felt a change within himself. The path ahead was still uncertain, fraught with challenges, but for the first time since leaving home, he felt truly excited about the journey to come. The mead hall of Hedeby buzzed with activity as traders, warriors, and locals gathered for the evening's entertainment. Bjorn stood near the entrance, his heart pounding. It had been a fortnight since his disastrous first performance, and Eric had deemed him ready to try again. "Remember," Eric murmured. "Feel the words. Don't just speak them." Bjorn nodded, taking a deep breath. As he stepped forward, a booming voice cut through the din. "Well, well, if it isn't the boy who thinks he's a skald." The crowd parted, revealing a large man with a flame-red beard and a cruel smirk. Bjorn recognized him as Thorstein, a well-known skald with a reputation for cutting wit and vicious put-downs. Thorstein swaggered forward, ale sloshing from his horn. "Come to grace us with more of your stuttering, lad, or have you learned to speak without pissing yourself?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Bjorn felt his face burning, but Eric's lessons echoed in his mind. He straightened his back and met Thorstein's mocking gaze. "I've come to share tales and honor the old ways. Bjorn said, his voice steadier than he felt. As all true skalds do. Thorstein's eyes narrowed. True skalds? You're no more a true skald than my horse's arse. Why don't you run along home to your mother's teat and leave the verses to real men? More laughter, but Bjorn noticed some in the crowd shifting uncomfortably. Thorstein's cruelty was crossing a line. Before Bjorn could respond, Eric stepped forward. Enough, Thorstein. The boy has as much right to speak as any here. Let his words prove his worth, not your taunts. Thorstein sneered. Fine, let him speak. But when he fails again, he leaves Hedeby and never darkens our halls with his pitiful attempts at poetry. And if he succeeds? Eric pressed. Ha! If by some miracle he doesn't make a fool of himself, Thorstein paused, then grinned maliciously. I'll give him my silver arm ring, the one given to me by King Harold himself. A murmur ran through the crowd. The stakes were high indeed. Eric looked at Bjorn, a question in his eyes. Bjorn hesitated only a moment before nodding. I accept the challenge. Very well, Thorstein laughed. But let's make this interesting. No pretty tales of love or nature. Give us a battle verse, boy. Let's see if you can stir the blood of warriors. Bjorn's mind raced. He had never composed a battle verse before, but as he looked around the hall, seeing the scarred faces of veteran warriors, an idea began to form. Taking a deep breath, Bjorn began. Hear now the clash of steel on shield, the battle cry across the field. Ravens circle, awaiting their feast, as warriors charge, man and beast. To his surprise, the words came easily, flowing from some deep well within him. He continued, his voice growing stronger. Axes bite and spears find flesh, blood eagle carved, a gory mesh. Valkyries watching from on high, choose who lives and who shall die. The hall had fallen silent, all eyes fixed on Bjorn. Even Thorstein's mocking smile had faded. In Odin's name, the frenzy grows, berserkers raging at their foes. Shield walls break and lines give way, Valhalla calls at the end of day. As Bjorn's voice faded, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then the hall erupted in cheers and applause. Warriors pounded their cups on tables, caught up in the bloodlust of the verse. Thorstein's face had turned as red as his beard. A lucky verse, he spat. But one swallow doesn't make a summer. Let's see you match this, boy. What followed was a battle of words as fierce as any clash of swords. Thorstein drew on years of experience, crafting verses of legendary heroes and epic battles. But for every thrust, Bjorn had a parry, his young voice ringing out with fresh imagery and powerful metaphors. As the contest wore on, the crowd's loyalty began to shift. More and more, they cheered for Bjorn, drawn in by his raw talent and the fire in his eyes. Thorstein, seeing victory slipping away, grew desperate. As Bjorn finished another verse, the older skald stumbled forward, seemingly drunk. But as he passed Bjorn, his hand flashed out, a dagger glinting in the torchlight. Bjorn, caught up in the thrill of performance, never saw it coming. But Eirik did. Bjorn, down, the old skald roared. Instinct took over. Bjorn dropped, feeling the whisper of steel passing over his head. Thorstein, overbalanced, stumbled past him. The hall erupted in chaos. Warriors leapt to their feet, some restraining Thorstein, others calling for his blood. In the confusion, no one noticed the brazier of hot coals tipping over. No one except Bjorn. He saw the flames catching on the rush-strewn floor, saw the path of fire racing towards a stack of ale barrels. Without thinking, Bjorn grabbed a nearby cloak, dousing it in a bucket of water. He leapt forward, beating at the flames with the wet cloth. Fire! He yelled. The ale! It'll explode! His warning cut through the din. Warriors who moments ago were ready to brawl now formed a bucket line, working together to douse the flames. In mere minutes, the danger had passed. As the smoke cleared, all eyes turned to Bjorn, standing amid the scorched rushes, his face smudged with soot. Eirik was the first to speak. Well done, lad. Quick thinking there. You may have saved more lives with that act than any battle verse could. The Jarl of Hedeby, a stern-faced man with iron-gray hair, stepped forward. Indeed. It seems we owe you a debt, young Skald. He turned to where Thorstein was being restrained. As for you, your treachery has forfeited more than just this contest. Guards, take him to the cells. We'll decide his fate in the morning. As Thorstein was dragged away, hurling curses, the Jarl turned back to Bjorn. You've proven yourself twice over tonight, boy, with your words and with your deeds. What is your name? Bjorn, my lord. Bjorn Sturkerson. The Jarl nodded. Bjorn Sturkerson. Remember that name, all of you, for I think we'll be hearing great things from this one in years to come. A cheer went up from the crowd. Warriors came forward to clap Bjorn on the back to offer him drinks and congratulations. Through it all, Bjorn felt as if he were in a dream. He caught Eric's eye across the room, saw the pride shining there, and felt a warm glow of accomplishment. As the excitement died down and the hall began to clear, Bjorn found himself alone with Eric. You did well tonight, lad, the old Skald said softly. But remember, with great talent comes great responsibility. The power to move men's hearts is a double-edged sword. Use it wisely. Bjorn nodded solemnly. I will, master, I swear it. Eric smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. Good. Now, let's see about getting that silver arm ring, shall we? You've earned it fair and square. As they walked out into the cool night air, Bjorn felt a change within himself. He was no longer just a boy playing at being a Skald. He had faced a challenge and emerged victorious. The path ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time Bjorn truly believed he had what it took to walk it. The autumn wind whipped across the fjord, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and the promise of a harsh winter to come. Bjorn stood at the edge of the water, his cloak billowing around him as he gazed out at the gray horizon. In the months since his victory over Thorstein, his reputation had grown. He was no longer just Eirik's apprentice, but a Skald in his own right, respected and sought after. A commotion from the docks drew his attention. A ship was approaching, its sail tattered and its crew looking haggard. As it drew closer, Bjorn recognized the banner of King Harald's messenger service. By the time the ship had docked, a crowd had gathered. Bjorn pushed his way to the front, standing beside Jarl Håkon as the messenger stumbled down the gangplank. My lord, the man gasped, falling to one knee before the Jarl. I bring grave news from King Harald. The Swedes are massing an army. They mean to invade before the snows come. A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Jarl Håkon's face hardened. How many? He demanded. At least 5,000 men, my lord. Maybe more. They've allied with several Danish chieftains as well. Murmurs of fear and anger swept through the gathered villagers. Bjorn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The Jarl raised his voice, addressing the crowd. Return to your homes. I must consult with my advisors. We will address the village at sundown. As the crowd dispersed, Bjorn felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Eirik, his mentor's face grave. Dark times are coming, lad, the old Skald said softly. Our words will be needed more than ever now. Bjorn nodded, his mind already racing with verses of courage and defiance. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire, the village gathered in the great hall. Jarl Håkon stood before them, his face etched with determination. My people, he began, for generations, we have lived in peace. But now, war comes to our shores. The Swedes and their allies think us weak, ripe for conquest. I say we show them the error of their ways. A cheer went up from the crowd, but Bjorn could see the fear behind the bravado in many eyes. The Jarl continued, We have sent word to our allies, but we cannot wait for them. We must prepare for battle now. Every able-bodied man and woman must train. We will need every sword, every axe, every bow. As the Jarl outlined his plans for defense, Bjorn felt a tug at his sleeve. It was Eirik, his face flushed with fever. It's your time, lad, the old Skald wheezed. They need hope. Give it to them. Before Bjorn could protest, Eirik was pushing him forward, The crowd parted, and suddenly Bjorn found himself standing before the assembled villagers, all eyes upon him. For a moment, he froze. Then, taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "Hear me, sons and daughters of the North. Blood of warriors, fierce and brave, our enemies think us easy prey, but they'll find no welcome in our graves." His voice grew stronger, filling the hall. "From mountains high to fjords so deep, this land is ours by right and might. Let Swedish steel meet Nordic iron in a clash that shakes the very night." The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. "Remember now our fathers' deeds, the sagas sung of glory past. We are their heirs, their blood runs true, our legends one that's built to last." As Bjorn's voice faded, there was a moment of silence. Then, as one, the hall erupted in a roar of defiance and determination. Men pounded their chests, women raised their fists to the sky. The fear that had gripped them moments before had transformed into a fierce resolve. Jarl Håkon clapped Bjorn on the shoulder, his eyes shining. "Well spoken, young skald. You've given us the fire we need." In the days that followed, the village became a hive of activity. Warriors honed their skills. Farmers forged makeshift weapons, and everyone worked to strengthen the defenses. Through it all, Bjorn moved among them, offering words of encouragement and verses of inspiration. But as the preparations continued, Eirik's condition worsened. The old skald was confined to his bed, racked with fever and a hacking cough. "You must go on without me, lad," Eirik gasped, clasping Bjorn's hand. "The people need you now more than ever." Bjorn felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "But I'm not ready," he protested. "There's still so much I don't know." Eirik managed a weak smile. "You know more than you think. Trust in yourself, as I trust in you." With a heavy heart, Bjorn left his mentor's bedside, determined to make him proud. The attack came on a moonless night, a week after the messenger's arrival. Bjorn was awakened by the blare of horns and the clash of steel. He grabbed his sword, a gift from Jarl Håkon, and rushed out into the chaos. Raiders had slipped past the outer defenses, setting fire to houses and cutting down anyone in their path. For a moment, Bjorn stood frozen, the reality of battle far different from the glorious verses he had composed. Then he heard a scream, a young boy cornered by two hulking warriors. Without thinking, Bjorn charged forward, his sword flashing in the firelight. He caught the first raider by surprise, his blade finding the gap between helmet and mail. The second turned, bringing his axe to bear. But Bjorn was quicker. He ducked under the swing and drove his sword up, feeling it bite deep. As the raider fell, Bjorn stared at his bloodied hands in shock. This was not the glorious combat of his verses. This was brutal, messy, and terrifying. A shout snapped him back to reality. "Bjorn, we need you at the gates." He raced through the burning village, rallying defenders as he went. At the main gate, he found Jarl Håkon organizing a desperate defense against a battering ram. "Sing for us, Skald," the Jarl roared over the din of battle. "Give us strength." Bjorn raised his voice, surprised at how steady it sounded. "Stand fast, my brothers. Hold the line. Let no foe pass. Let no heart fail. For hearth and home, for kith and kin, we'll send these bastards back to hell." His words seemed to lend new strength to the defenders. They pushed back against the gate, repelling the battering ram. Arrows rained down on the attackers from the walls above. For hours, the battle raged. Bjorn found himself fighting alongside those he had inspired, his sword as busy as his voice. As dawn broke, the raiders finally retreated, leaving behind their dead and wounded. The village had held, but at a terrible cost. Many buildings were burned, and too many good people lay dead or dying. As Bjorn walked among the wounded, offering what comfort he could, he felt a deep unease settling in his gut. He found Jarl Håkon overseeing the cleanup, the leader's arm bound in a bloody bandage. "We won," Bjorn said, his voice hollow. The Jarl looked at him, his eyes heavy with the weight of command. "Aye, we did. Thanks in no small part to you, young Skald. Your words gave us courage when we needed it most. But Bjorn barely heard the praise. All he could see were the bodies being laid out, the weeping families, the devastation that his words had in some way led to. This isn't what I wanted," he whispered. The Jarl's face softened. "No one ever does, lad. But this is the reality of the world we live in. Sometimes we must fight to protect what we love." Bjorn nodded numbly, but inside, his mind was in turmoil. He had dreamed of glory, of inspiring great deeds. But now, faced with the harsh truth of battle, he questioned everything. Was this truly the path he was meant to walk? Could he bear the weight of the lives his words might lead to their deaths? As the sun rose higher, casting its light on the aftermath of the night's violence, Bjorn stood alone, his heart heavy with doubt. The power of his words had never felt more like a burden than it did in that moment. The longship creaked and groaned as it battled against the icy waters of the northern sea. Bjorn stood at the prow, his breath misting in the frigid air as he gazed at the looming snow-capped mountains ahead. 3 months had passed since the raid on his village, and the young skald had jumped at the chance to join this expedition to the far north. He needed time and distance to wrestle with the doubts that plagued him. "See anything interesting, poet?" The gruff voice belonged to Gunnar Broadaxe, a hulking warrior with a beard like frozen wire. Bjorn shook his head. "Just ice and more ice." Gunnar laughed, a sound like rocks in a barrel. "What did you expect, fields of flowers? This is the edge of the world, boy. The domain of frost giants and worse." As if to emphasize his point, a chunk of ice the size of a house calved off a nearby glacier, crashing into the sea with a thunderous roar. Bjorn flinched, but Gunnar just grinned. "Don't worry, lad. Old Sina here has seen worse." He patted the ship's dragon-headed prow affectionately. Their leader, Jarl Sigurd the Far-Traveled, approached, his one good eye squinting against the wind. "We'll make landfall before nightfall," he announced. "Be ready. The real journey begins once we leave the ship." Bjorn nodded, trying to quell the nervous excitement in his gut. This expedition was seeking more than just new lands to raid or trade with. Rumors spoke of ancient runes, carved by the gods themselves, hidden in a temple deep in these frozen wastes. Runes that held the power to craft verses of unimaginable potency. As the sun began to set, painting the ice in shades of fire, they finally reached the shore. The crew worked quickly to unload supplies and secure the ship. No one wanted to be caught unprepared when true darkness fell in this unforgiving land. That night, huddled around a meager fire, Bjorn listened as Jarl Sigurd laid out their plan. "The temple lies 3 days' march inland," the Jarl said, pointing to a crude map. "We'll follow the river valley, then cross the glacier. If the gods favor us, we'll reach the temple before the next full moon." "And if they don't?" someone muttered. Sigurd's face hardened. "Then our bones will join those of all the other fools who've sought glory in this cursed place." The next morning they set out under a steel-gray sky. The going was tough, with treacherous ice and deep snow slowing their progress. Bjorn found himself struggling to keep up, unused to such grueling travel. On the second day, as they picked their way across a narrow mountain pass, Gunnar fell back to walk beside him. "You're doing better than I expected, poet," the big man said. "Thought you'd have turned back by now." Bjorn managed a wry smile. "The thought has crossed my mind, but I need to see this through." Gunnar studied him for a moment. "This about more than just fame and glory for you, isn't it?" Bjorn hesitated, then nodded. "I've seen what my words can do. The power they have to inspire men to great and terrible deeds. I need to understand that power better, to know if I'm worthy of wielding it." Gunnar clapped him on the shoulder, nearly sending Bjorn stumbling. "Heavy thoughts for such a young head, but worthy ones. Just don't forget to watch your step while you're pondering the mysteries of the universe." As if on cue, Bjorn's foot hit a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow. He windmilled his arms, teetering on the edge of a steep drop. Gunnar's hand shot out, grabbing the back of Bjorn's cloak and hauling him to safety. "See what I mean?" The warrior chuckled. On the third day, They reached the glacier. It stretched before them like a frozen sea, riddled with crevasses and towering ice formations. As they carefully made their way across, the wind began to pick up, driving needles of ice into any exposed skin. "Storm's coming," Jarl Sigurd growled. "We need to find shelter, and fast." They quickened their pace, searching desperately for any kind of refuge from the approaching blizzard. Just as the first heavy snowflakes began to fall, Gunnar let out a shout. "There! A cave!" They rushed towards the dark opening in the ice, ducking inside just as the full fury of the storm hit. The cave was deep, stretching back into the heart of the glacier. As they caught their breath, Bjorn noticed something strange about the walls. "Jarl Sigurd," he called out. "Look at this." The cave walls were covered in intricate carvings, lines and swirls that seemed to shift and move in the flickering light of their torches. Sigurd's one eye widened. "By Odin's beard," he breathed. "The runes. We've found them." As the group spread out to examine the carvings, Bjorn felt a strange humming in his bones, as if the very air was vibrating with power. He reached out, tracing a finger along one of the runes. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the cave entrance. "That's far enough, Sigurd." They whirled to see a group of armed warriors silhouetted against the storm. Their leader stepped forward, a tall woman with hair as white as the surrounding snow. "Astrid Frostborn," Sigurd spat. "I should have known you'd be sniffing around here too." Astrid smiled coldly. "Did you really think you were the only one seeking the power of the god runes? Now be a good boy and step aside. My clan will be taking possession of this little treasure trove." "Over my dead body," Gunnar growled, hefting his axe. "That can be arranged," Astrid replied sweetly. What followed was a chaotic melee in the confines of the ice cave. Steel rang against steel, war cries echoed off the frozen walls. Bjorn found himself backed into a corner, desperately parrying blows from a warrior twice his size. As he fought for his life, Bjorn's eyes kept being drawn to the runes on the wall. They seemed to pulse with an inner light now, as if awakened by the violence. Without conscious thought, he began to speak, his voice rising above the din of battle. "Winds of winter, heed my call, ice and snow, rise as a wall. By ancient power, by runic might, drive these foes into the night." To Bjorn's amazement, the very air seemed to respond to his words. A howling gust tore through the cave, picking up shards of ice and hurling them at Astrid's warriors. The attackers cried out in pain and surprise, shielding their eyes from the icy onslaught. Taking advantage of the confusion, Sigurd bellowed, "To me! We make for the exit." They fought their way out of the cave and into the teeth of the blizzard. But now, strangely, the storm seemed to part around them, creating a bubble of calm in the midst of the chaos. As they stumbled through the snow, Gunnar turned to Bjorn with a look of awe. "By Thor's hammer, boy. What did you do back there?" Bjorn shook his head, still stunned. I don't know. The words just came to me. It was like the runes were speaking through me." Jarl Sigurd, overhearing, fixed Bjorn with his one-eyed stare. "It seems we've found more than just carvings on a wall. The power of the god runes lives on in you, young skald." As they made their way back towards the ship, Bjorn's mind reeled with the implications of what had happened. He had touched a power beyond anything he had imagined, had wielded the very forces of nature with his words. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. The longship Sina cut through the choppy waters of the North Sea, her dragon prow rising and falling with each swell. Bjorn stood at the stern, his eyes fixed on the horizon behind them. The icy shores of the far north had long since faded from view, but the young skald could still feel the power of the runes thrumming through his veins. "Still expecting the Frostborn clan to come chasing after us?" Gunnar's gruff voice broke through Bjorn's reverie. Bjorn shook his head. "No, it's not that. It's just, everything feels different now. Like the world has shifted somehow." Gunnar grunted. "Aye, well, that's what happens when you start throwing around god magic. Makes a man see things differently." He clapped Bjorn on the shoulder. "Just don't let it go to your head, eh? You're still the same scrawny poet who nearly fell off a mountain, remember? Bjorn managed to smile, grateful for the warrior's grounding presence. But before he could reply, a shout came from the lookout. "Sea mist ahead, and it's moving against the wind." Jarl Sigurd rushed to the prow, his one eye narrowing as he peered into the distance. "By Odin's beard," he muttered. "It can't be." The mist rolled towards them with unnatural speed, engulfing the ship in a thick gray blanket. The temperature dropped sharply, and an eerie silence fell over the crew. Suddenly, the water beside the ship erupted. A massive, serpentine form rose from the depths, water cascading from scales the size of shield bosses. A head the size of a longhouse emerged from the mist, yellow eyes glowing with ancient malevolence. "Jormungandr," Gunnar breathed, his face pale beneath his beard. "The world serpent itself." Panic erupted on deck. Warriors scrambled for weapons, though all knew their mortal steel would be useless against such a beast. Jarl Sigurd bellowed orders, trying to maintain some semblance of control. The serpent's massive head swung towards the ship, its maw opening to reveal rows of teeth like gleaming swords. As it lunged forward, Bjorn felt something stir within him. Without conscious thought, he stepped forward, raising his voice above the chaos. "Great serpent of the endless sea, encircler of the world are thee. We are but motes upon thy scales. Grant us passage, calm these gales." To everyone's astonishment, the serpent paused in its attack, its glowing eyes fixed upon Bjorn, and for a moment that stretched into eternity, man and monster regarded each other. Then slowly, the massive head lowered back into the waves. The mist began to disperse, and the oppressive silence lifted. As the crew stood in stunned disbelief, Jarl Sigurd approached Bjorn. "It seems your newfound powers extend beyond mere ice and snow, young skald," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and wariness. Bjorn nodded, still processing what had just occurred. I'm not sure how I did that. The words just came to me." "Well, however you did it, you've saved us all," Gunnar said, clapping Bjorn on the back hard enough to make him stagger. "I'd say that calls for a celebration." But their relief was short-lived. As the last wisps of mist cleared, they found themselves in unfamiliar waters. Jagged cliffs rose on all sides, hemming them in. "Where in hell's realm are we?" one of the crew muttered. Jarl Sigurd frowned, consulting his charts. "This cove isn't on any map I've ever seen. It's as if the world serpent has delivered us to some hidden corner of the world." As they cautiously navigated the narrow channel, Bjorn spotted something on the cliff face. "Look there," he called out. "Are those runes?" Carved into the very rock were symbols similar to those they'd seen in the ice cave. They glowed faintly, pulsing in time with Bjorn's heartbeat. "There," Sigurd pointed. "A beach. We'll make landfall and investigate these runes. Be on your guard, men. We know not what other wonders or horrors this place may hold." As they beached the ship and made camp, an unsettling feeling crept over Bjorn. He felt as if they were being watched, though every time he turned to look, he saw nothing but rocks and scrub brush. That night, as the crew huddled around their fires, trading uneasy glances at the looming cliffs, Bjorn found himself unable to sleep. He wandered away from the camp, drawn inexorably towards the runic carvings. As he approached the cliff face, a voice spoke from the shadows. "I wondered how long it would take you to seek me out, young one." Bjorn whirled, his hand going to the knife at his belt. From a crevice in the rock emerged an ancient figure, bent with age but with eyes that burned with inner fire. "Who are you?" Bjorn demanded. The old man smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "I have had many names over the long years, but you may call me Bragi, the Skald of Skalds." Bjorn's eyes widened. Bragi was a figure of legend, said to have learned the art of poetry from Odin himself. "But you're just a myth." Bragi cackled. "Oh, I'm quite real, boy. As real as the power you've only just begun to tap into." He fixed Bjorn with a penetrating stare. "You've tasted the merest drop from the well of runic might. I can teach you to drink deeply from that source, to craft verses that could shake the very foundations of Yggdrasil itself. Bjorn felt a thrill of excitement, quickly tempered by caution. And what would be the price of such knowledge? Bragi's smile widened, revealing more of those unsettling teeth. Ah, clever lad, there's always a price, isn't there? For power such as this? Well, let's just say it would require a sacrifice. Something precious, something irreplaceable. A chill ran down Bjorn's spine, but before he could respond, a shout came from the direction of the camp. Bjorn, where are you, lad? Gunnar's voice. Bjorn turned towards the sound, then looked back to find Bragi had vanished. Think on my offer, young skald, the old man's voice echoed from the darkness. We will speak again. The next day, Bjorn was distracted, mulling over Bragi's words. Jarl Sigurd noticed his preoccupation. Out with it, lad, the leader growled. What's got you so lost in thought? Bjorn hesitated, then related his encounter with the legendary skald. Sigurd's face grew grave as he listened. Bragi the Undying, he muttered. I've heard tales. None of them good. They say he's lived for centuries, trading pieces of his soul for ever greater power. Be wary, Bjorn. Such bargains often end in tragedy. But despite the warning, Bjorn found himself drawn back to the cliffs that night. Bragi was waiting for him. Have you considered my offer, boy? Bjorn nodded slowly. I have, but I need to know more. What exactly would this sacrifice entail? Bragi's eyes glittered in the moonlight. Something you hold dear. A memory, perhaps, or a cherished relationship. The dearer the sacrifice, the greater the power gained. Bjorn frowned. That seems a steep price. All great power comes at a cost, Bragi shrugged. But think of what you could accomplish. Your words could topple kingdoms, raise armies, even challenge the gods themselves. As Bragi spoke, Bjorn felt a familiar humming in his bones. The runes on the cliff face began to glow brighter, pulsing with barely contained energy. For a moment, he was tempted. The thought of such power was intoxicating. But then he remembered the faces of his friends, of his mentor Eric. He thought of the destruction his words had already caused, both good and ill. Could he trust himself with even greater power? No, Bjorn said finally, his voice firm. The price is too high. I'll find my own path to mastery. Bragi's face contorted with rage. Fool boy, you would spurn such an opportunity? The old skald began to change, his form twisting and stretching. If you will not pay the price willingly, then I shall take it by force. Bjorn stumbled backwards as Bragi lunged at him, the old man's fingers now tipped with wicked claws. But before the transformed skald could reach him, an axe whistled through the air, burying itself in Bragi's chest. Get back, lad, Gunnar roared, charging forward with his sword drawn. What followed was a chaotic battle, with Bragi displaying strength and speed far beyond his apparent years. Bjorn found himself backed against the cliff face, the runes pulsing urgently behind him. In desperation, he placed his hand on the carved symbols and began to speak. Runes of power, heed my call, protect us now from Bragi's thrall. By ancient might and skaldic verse, bind this evil, break this curse. The runes flared with blinding light. Bragi screamed, a sound of inhuman anguish, as tendrils of glowing energy wrapped around him. There was a deafening crack, and when the light faded, the transformed skald was gone. In his place was a twisted tree, its bark carved with countless runes. Gunnar stood panting, staring at the tree in disbelief. By Thor's hairy balls, he muttered. What in the 9 worlds just happened? Bjorn shook his head, feeling drained. I'm not entirely sure, but I think I just bound Bragi into the very runes he sought to control. As the rest of the crew came running, drawn by the commotion, Jarl Sigurd pulled Bjorn aside. You've done a great thing here, lad, but you've also touched power that few mortals were meant to wield. There will be consequences. Bjorn nodded soberly. I know, but I also know that I can't stay here. There's too much temptation, too much danger. Sigurd studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Take the small boat. Head south. There's a monastery on the coast of Northumbria where you might find some peace to sort out your thoughts. As dawn broke, Bjorn prepared to set out alone. Gunnar approached, looking uncharacteristically serious. You be careful out there, poet, the big man said gruffly. And remember, power's all well and good, but it's the man wielding it that matters most. Bjorn clasped Gunnar's arm. I'll remember. Thank you, my friend. As Bjorn's small boat disappeared into the morning mist, he felt both a sense of loss and a glimmer of hope. He had resisted the lure of easy power, but in doing so had discovered depths of strength within himself he never knew existed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with clear eyes and an open heart. The runes had shown him a glimpse of godlike power. Now it was up to him to prove worthy of the gift he'd been given. The longship crested a wave, and suddenly there it was. The fjord of Bjorn's youth, unchanged yet somehow smaller than he remembered. 5 years had passed since he'd left home. A boy chasing dreams of poetry and glory. Now he returned a man, his name whispered in halls across the Norse lands, his verses sung by skalds he'd once idolized. As they drew closer to shore, Bjorn felt a knot forming in his gut. He'd faced down berserkers, calmed sea monsters, and bound ancient evils with his words. Yet the thought of facing his father again filled him with a dread he couldn't shake. Having second thoughts, poet? The gruff voice belonged to Gunnar Broadaxe, who'd insisted on accompanying Bjorn on this journey home. Bjorn managed a wry smile. Just wondering if father's swing has slowed in his old age. I might actually be able to dodge it this time. Gunnar laughed, a sound like rocks in a barrel. From what you've told me of Storie the Strong, I wouldn't count on it. As they beached the ship, a crowd began to gather. Bjorn recognized faces from his childhood, older now, weathered by time and hardship. Their expressions were a mix of curiosity and wariness. He was, after all, the boy who'd abandoned them to chase fantastical dreams. An old woman pushed her way to the front, her eyes widening in recognition. Bjorn? Bjorn Sturkarsson? By the gods, it is you. Hello, Astrid, Bjorn said warmly, embracing his father's sister. It's good to see you. Astrid pulled back, her face grave. You've come none too soon, nephew. Your father, he's not well. The knot in Bjorn's stomach tightened. Take me to him. As they made their way through the village, Bjorn noticed signs of recent battle, scorched buildings, hastily repaired palisades. He turned to Astrid. What happened here? The old woman's face darkened. The Ulfson clan. They've been raiding up and down the coast. We've repelled them twice now, but... She trailed off, her meaning clear. The village wouldn't survive another attack. They reached Bjorn's childhood home, a sturdy longhouse that seemed to have shrunk in his absence. Taking a deep breath, he ducked through the low doorway. The interior was dim, smoky from the central hearth. On a bed piled with furs lay a figure Bjorn barely recognized. Storie the Strong had been a bear of a man, towering and broad-shouldered. The man before him now seemed shrunken, his once fierce face gaunt and pale. Sturker's eyes flickered open as Bjorn approached. For a moment there was no recognition. Then those eyes narrowed. So, the old warrior rasped, the prodigal son returns. Bjorn swallowed hard. Hello, father. Storie struggled to sit up, waving away Astrid's attempts to help. Come to see if the old man's dead yet? To claim your inheritance? No, Save your silver tongue, boy. I've heard tales of your exploits, the great skald Bjorn, whose words can calm monsters and topple kingdoms. Storie spat the words like a curse. Pretty words won't defend our people when the Ulfsons come again. Bjorn felt a familiar anger rising. Some things, it seemed, never changed. My pretty words have rallied armies and turned the tide of battles, father. I'm not the same boy who left here 5 years ago. Storie opened his mouth to retort, but a fit of coughing overtook him. When it passed, he fixed Bjorn with a glare that had lost none of its intensity. Prove it then, Prove you're more than just talk." Before Bjorn could respond, shouts erupted from outside. Gunnar burst through the door, his axe already in hand. "Ships on the horizon," he bellowed. "At least 5 of them. The Ulfsons are coming." The village erupted into frenzied activity. Women and children were hurried to the safety of the hills, while every able-bodied man and woman prepared for battle. Bjorn found himself swept up in the preparations, his homecoming forgotten in the face of imminent attack. As the enemy ships drew closer, Bjorn climbed to the top of the palisade wall. The defenders looked to him, fear evident in their eyes. They were outnumbered at least 3 to 1. Taking a deep breath, Bjorn began to speak, his voice carrying over the nervous murmurs. "Sons and daughters of the fjord, hear my words and take up sword. Though foes may come on wings of war, we'll send them fleeing from our shore." As he spoke, Bjorn felt the familiar thrum of power in his veins. The runes he'd learned in that icy cave seemed to pulse beneath his skin. "In our veins runs blood of kings, of heroes old, of whom Skald sings. Stand fast now, let courage rise, for glory waits 'neath northern skies." A change came over the defenders, backs straightened, jaws set with determination. The fear in their eyes was replaced by a fierce resolve. The battle that followed was brutal and chaotic. The Ulfson raiders crashed against the palisade like a tidal wave, their war cries shaking the very earth. But the defenders held, bolstered by Bjorn's words and the strength of desperation. Bjorn found himself in the thick of the fighting, his sword flashing alongside Gunnar's axe. His verses, shouted above the din of battle, seemed to lend strength to their arms and speed to their blows. But as the day wore on, it became clear that courage and inspiration alone would not be enough. The defenders were simply too few and the Ulfsons too many. Slowly but surely, they were being pushed back. As Bjorn helped a wounded man to safety, he caught sight of his father. Sturkar had somehow dragged himself from his sickbed and now stood atop a makeshift barricade, wielding his great war hammer despite his obvious weakness. Their eyes met across the battlefield. In that moment, a lifetime of misunderstanding and hurt seemed to pass between them. Bjorn saw in his father's eyes not disappointment, but a grudging respect. Sturkar nodded once, a gesture that spoke volumes. Renewed determination flooded through Bjorn. He raised his voice once more, channeling every ounce of power he'd learned in his travels. "Odin Allfather, hear our plea. Send thy ravens, set us free. Thor Thunderer, lend thy might, aid us in this desperate fight." The sky darkened as he spoke, clouds gathering with unnatural speed. A hush fell over the battlefield as both attackers and defenders looked to the heavens in awe and fear. Suddenly, a deafening crack of thunder split the air. Lightning arced down from the clouds, striking the ground between the two forces. When the blinding flash faded, a figure stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, wielding a hammer that crackled with electricity. "Thor," Bjorn breathed, scarcely believing his eyes. The god of thunder raised his hammer high, and with a roar that shook the mountains, charged into the ranks of the Ulfson raiders. Panic spread through the attacking force as they faced the wrath of a god made flesh. What followed was less a battle than a rout. The Ulfsons broke and fled, many throwing themselves into the sea in their desperation to escape. As the last raider was driven from the shore, Thor turned to face the awestruck defenders. His eyes found Bjorn, and he nodded once before vanishing in another blinding flash of lightning. In the stunned silence that followed, Gunnar was the first to speak. "By all the gods, poet," he said, his voice hoarse, "when you call for aid, you don't mess around." A ragged cheer went up from the defenders, growing in volume until it echoed off the mountains. Bjorn found himself lifted onto shoulders, hailed as the savior of the village. But his eyes sought out only one person. He found Sturkar leaning heavily on his warhammer, blood seeping from a wound in his side. The old warrior's face was pale, but his eyes shone with a fierce pride. "Father," Bjorn said, rushing to support him. "You're hurt. We need to get you inside." Sturkar waved him off. "Bah, it's nothing, just a scratch." But he allowed Bjorn to help him back to the longhouse. As they settled Stirkar onto his bed, the old man gripped Bjorn's arm with surprising strength. "You did well today, son," he said gruffly. "Your mother, she would have been proud." Bjorn felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you, father." Stirkar's eyes were growing heavy, the adrenaline of battle fading. "Perhaps," he murmured, "there's more power in your words than I gave you credit for." As his father drifted into an exhausted sleep, Bjorn sat back, a mix of emotions swirling within him. He had returned home expecting to find only ghosts and old resentments. Instead, he'd found a place that still needed him, and a relationship that, while scarred, was not beyond healing. Outside, he could hear the villagers beginning to celebrate their unlikely victory. There would be tales told of this day for generations to come. The great hall of King Harold Bluetooth's fortress at Jelling teemed with activity. Nobles in fine furs and gleaming arm rings jostled for position, while servants scurried about with platters of meat and horns of ale. Amidst it all, Bjorn stood quietly, feeling out of place in his travel-stained cloak. "Stop fidgeting," Gunnar growled under his breath. The big warrior looked even more uncomfortable than Bjorn felt, his axe hand twitching as if longing for the familiar weight of his weapon. "I'm not fidgeting," Bjorn muttered back. "I'm trying to figure out who all these people are and why they keep staring at us." A smooth voice cut through their whispered exchange. "They stare because you, my friend, are the talk of the court." Bjorn turned to find a slim, well-dressed man regarding him with open curiosity. The stranger bowed slightly. "Halvard Silvertongue, at your service." The king scowled. "Well, at least until your arrival." Bjorn frowned. "I'm not here to take anyone's position. The king's summons didn't explain why I was called here." Halvard's eyebrows rose. "No? How intriguing. Well, allow me to illuminate you on the delicate situation our good King Harold finds himself in." As Halvard spoke, painting a picture of clan rivalries and simmering tensions, Bjorn felt a familiar unease settling in his gut. He'd come to Jelling expecting a simple performance before the king. Instead, he found himself stepping into a viper's nest of political intrigue. Their conversation was interrupted by a blare of horns. The crowd parted as King Harold entered, flanked by his huskarls. The king was a bear of a man, his beard streaked with gray but his eyes sharp and calculating. Harold's gaze swept the hall, coming to rest on Bjorn. He gestured imperiously. "You, Skald, approach." Bjorn stepped forward, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes upon him. He bowed low. "My king." "So," Harold rumbled, "you're the one they call the god-touched Skald, the one who summoned Thor himself to battle." Bjorn chose his words carefully. "Tales often grow in the telling, my king. I merely offered a prayer in a desperate hour." A hint of a smile tugged at Harold's beard. "Modesty. How refreshing." His expression hardened. "But I didn't summon you here for modesty. I need your gift, Skald. Denmark stands on the brink of civil war. The old clan rivalries threaten to tear the kingdom apart. I need a verse, a mighty one, to remind these squabbling jarls that we are one people." Bjorn felt the weight of the king's words settle on his shoulders. I'm honored by your trust, my king. But surely your own Skald, Halvard, would be better suited to such an important task?" Harold waved a hand dismissively. "Halvard's verses are pretty enough, but they lack the power I need. I want words that will shake the very foundations of these men's souls, words that will make them remember their oaths of fealty." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Fail me in this, Skald, and you'll wish you'd never set foot in my hall. Succeed, and you'll have wealth and position beyond your wildest dreams." With that, the king turned away, leaving Bjorn to ponder the magnitude of the task before him. As the court resumed its normal bustle, Halvard reappeared at Bjorn's side. "Well," the older Skald said with a tight smile, "it seems you've quite the challenge ahead of you. I do hope you're up to it, for all our sakes." Over the next few days, Bjorn immersed himself in the complex web of alliances and grudges that made up the Danish court. He spoke with jarls and thralls alike, piecing together the history that had led them to this precarious moment. All the while he could feel the pressure mounting. Whispers followed him through the halls. Some spoke of him with awe, others with suspicion and resentment. More than once he caught sight of hands moving to sword hilts as he passed. On the night before he was to present his verse to the king, Bjorn found himself unable to sleep. He slipped out of his chambers, nodding to the guard Harold had insisted on providing. The cool night air cleared his head as he walked the ramparts, gazing out over the sleeping town. A scuffle and a muffled cry snapped him to alertness. Rounding a corner, he saw 3 dark-clad figures struggling with a fourth. A glint of steel caught the moonlight. Without thinking, Bjorn shouted, "Guards! Assassins on the wall!" The attackers turned, startled by his cry. In that moment, their victim, Bjorn recognized the king's young son Swine, broke free and ran. One of the assassins raised a bow, taking aim at the fleeing prince. Bjorn felt the familiar surge of power rising within him. Words sprang to his lips. Arrows fall and miss their mark. Shadows flee before the light. By Skald's word and Odin's will, no blood be spilled this night. The arrow loosed, but veered wildly off course, clattering harmlessly against the stone. The assassins, their faces pale with shock, turned to flee. But already the sound of running feet and shouted orders filled the air as the garrison roused. Within moments, the ramparts were swarming with guards. King Harold himself appeared, his sword in hand and murder in his eyes. "What happened here?" he demanded. Bjorn quickly recounted what he'd seen. Sweyn, still shaken, corroborated his story. Harold's face darkened with each word. "Cowards," he spat, "to strike at me through my son." He turned to his captain of the guard. "I want them found. Tear this fortress apart if you have to." As the search began in earnest, Harold turned his attention to Bjorn. "You've done me a great service this night, Skald, one I won't soon forget." Bjorn bowed his head. "I'm glad I was in the right place at the right time, my king." Harold studied him for a long moment. "Perhaps it was more than mere chance that brought you here. The gods work in mysterious ways." He clapped a hand on Bjorn's shoulder. "Come, we have much to discuss." The rest of the night passed in a blur of activity. Suspects were rounded up, interrogated. Accusations flew as rival jarls pointed fingers at one another. By dawn, the fortress was a powder keg ready to explode. Harold called the court to assembly. The great hall was packed, the air thick with tension and unspoken threats. The king's face was grim as he addressed the crowd. Last night, cowards and traitors attempted to strike at the very heart of Denmark. They failed, thanks to the intervention of our guest, the Skald Bjorn. Harold's eyes swept the room. But this attempt has made one thing clear. The divisions among us run deeper than I feared. We stand now at a crossroads. We can give in to our petty grievances and tear this kingdom apart. Or we can remember the bonds that unite us. He gestured to Bjorn. "Skald, you came here to give us a verse of unity. Never has that need been greater than at this moment. Speak now, and let your words guide us back from the brink of chaos." Bjorn stepped forward, his heart pounding. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on him. But as he looked out over the sea of faces, nobles and commoners, warriors and peacemakers, he felt a sudden clarity. He began to speak, his voice low at first, but growing in strength and power. "Hear me, sons of Denmark, daughters of the North, from Jutland's shores to Zealand's verdant fields. Though clan may war with clan, and blood feuds run deep, remember now the ties that bind us all. We are the children of Odin, the heirs of Thor, our roots entwined like Yggdrasil's mighty boughs. In our veins flows the blood of heroes old, of seafarers and settlers, skalds and kings. Look to the foe that gnaws at Daneland's roots, not your brother's face, but chaos' creeping shadow. United we stand, a bulwark against the storm. Divided we'll fall, our glory turn to dust. So cast aside your grievances, shield brothers all, Let hammer and anvil forge our bonds anew. For in unity lies strength, in kinship our shield. Together we'll write sagas yet untold. By Harold's crown and Odin's watchful eye, I call you now to honor oaths long sworn. Let Denmark rise, a beacon in the north, our deeds a song to echo through the ages. As Bjorn's voice faded, a hush fell over the hall. For a heartbeat, he feared his words had fallen short. Then from the back of the crowd, a voice cried out, "For Denmark!" The cry was taken up, swelling until it shook the very rafters. Bjorn watched in amazement as old enemies clasped arms, as years of resentment seemed to melt away in the face of a greater purpose. King Harold stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "The Skald has shown us the way. Let this be a new beginning for Denmark. United, we will face whatever storms may come." As the assembly dissolved into celebrations, Harold turned to Bjorn. "Well done, Skald. You've given us more than just pretty words. You've given us hope." Bjorn bowed deeply. "Thank you, my king. I only spoke what was already in their hearts." Harold smiled, a rare sight that transformed his stern face. "And that, my young friend, is the true power of a Skald. Remember it well." As the festivities continued around him, Bjorn felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He had faced his greatest challenge yet and emerged victorious. Whatever the future might hold, he knew now that his words had the power not just to inspire, but to heal, to unite, to shape the very course of history. The boy who had left his village dreaming of becoming a Skald was gone. In his place stood a man who understood the true weight and wonder of his gift. The mist clung to the longship like a shroud, obscuring all but the nearest waves. Bjorn stood at the prow, his eyes straining to pierce the gloom. Behind him the crew muttered uneasily, their oars cutting through water that seemed thicker than mere sea. "We shouldn't be here," Gunnar growled, coming to stand beside Bjorn. "This place, it's not natural." Bjorn nodded, understanding his friend's unease. The island they sought was spoken of only in whispers, a place of legend and dark power. Some said it was the birthplace of skaldic magic, others that it was a gateway to hell itself. "Natural or not," Bjorn replied, "the answers I seek are here. I can feel it." As if in response to his words, the mist began to part. A rocky shoreline materialized before them, dominated by a looming mountain whose peak was lost in roiling clouds. "Helgafjell," Bjorn breathed, "the holy mountain." As they beached the ship, an oppressive silence fell over the crew. No birds called, no insects chirped. Even the waves seemed muted, as if the very island absorbed all sound. "Right then," Gunnar said, hefting his axe. "Let's get this over with. The sooner we leave this cursed place, the better." But as they made to disembark, a voice rang out, seeming to come from the air itself. "Who dares to tread upon the shore, where mortals are welcome no more? Speak thy name and purpose clear, or never leave this island drear." Bjorn stepped forward, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. "I am Bjorn, called God-touched Skald, seeker of truths both new and old. I come to learn, to understand, the power that flows through voice and hand." For a moment, silence reigned. Then the voice spoke again, tinged with what might have been amusement. "Bold words, young Skald, but are they true? 3 tasks I set, impossible to do. Complete them all with verse alone, or join the shades of flesh and bone." The air shimmered, and suddenly before them stood a figure that seemed woven from mist and shadow. It gestured towards the mountain. "Your first task awaits at Helgafjell's peak, where wind and stone their secrets keep. Calm the tempest, still the stone, with naught but words, and words alone." With that, the figure vanished, leaving behind only a lingering chill. Gunnar spat on the ground. "I mislike this, Bjorn. We should leave now, while we still can." But Bjorn shook his head, already starting towards the mountain path. "You know I can't do that, my friend. Not when I'm so close to understanding the true nature of our gift." The climb was arduous, the path treacherous. As they neared the summit, the wind rose to a howling gale, whipping stones through the air with deadly force. Bjorn raised his voice against the storm. "Winds of fury, winds of might, heed my words and calm thy flight. Stones that dance on tempest's breath, return to earth and silent rest." As he spoke, Bjorn felt the familiar surge of power coursing through him. But this was different, stronger somehow. The very air seemed to vibrate with the force of his words. Slowly, impossibly, the wind began to die. The stones suspended in midair gently floated to the ground. Within moments, an eerie calm settled over the mountaintop. Gunnar stared at Bjorn in awe. "By Thor's hammer," he whispered. "I've seen you work wonders before, but this..." Before Bjorn could respond, the misty figure reappeared. "Well done, Skald, but your trials have only begun. In the caverns beneath the mountain lies your second task. Bring light to endless darkness and truth to ancient lies." The figure gestured, and the ground beneath their feet gave way. Bjorn and Gunnar found themselves tumbling into inky blackness. When they came to rest, bruised but unbroken, they were surrounded by absolute darkness. No glimmer of light penetrated the gloom. "Bjorn?" Gunnar's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "I can't see a damn thing." Bjorn reached out, groping until he found his friend's arm. "It's all right. We're together. Now let me see if I can do something about this darkness." Taking a deep breath, Bjorn began to weave his verse. "In blackest night, where shadows reign, let words ignite a guiding flame. Illuminate what's hidden here. Reveal the truths we hold so dear." As he spoke the last word, a soft glow began to emanate from the very walls of the cavern. Intricate runes, invisible in the darkness, now shimmered with an inner light. Gunnar gasped. "It's beautiful." Bjorn nodded, tracing the runes with his fingers. "And powerful. These are the oldest runes I've ever seen. The stories they tell." His voice trailed off as he began to decipher the ancient writings. Hours passed as Bjorn pored over the runes, his excitement growing with each revelation. The origin of skaldic magic, the true nature of the power they wielded, it was all here. But as understanding dawned, so too did a creeping horror. The price of this power, the sacrifices required to truly master it. "Bjorn," Gunnar's worried voice cut through his reverie. "Something's coming." A low rumble filled the cavern as a section of wall ground open. From the new passage emerged a figure that seemed crafted from living stone, its eyes glowing with an inner fire. "You have brought light to darkness," the figure intoned, its voice like grinding boulders. "But have you found truth in ancient lies? Speak now, Skald, and prove your worth." Bjorn stepped forward, his mind racing. The runes had revealed terrible truths, things that could shake the very foundations of their world. But could he speak them aloud? Should he? Taking a deep breath, he began. "In ages past, when gods walked free, a bargain struck twixt them and we. Power granted, a gift divine, but at a cost both dark and fine. For every verse that shapes the world, a piece of soul to chaos hurled. The greater might a skald may claim, the more he's bound in Odin's name. This gift we bear, both boon and curse, can heal or harm, for better or worse. The choice is ours with every word to serve the light or shadow stirred." As Bjorn's voice faded, the stone figure regarded him silently. Then, slowly, it nodded. "Truth you have spoken, bitter though it be. You have passed the second trial. But one task remains, the greatest yet. At the heart of the island lies the wellspring of inspiration, source of all skaldic power. There, you must make a choice that will shape not only your fate, but the fate of all skalds to come." With that, the figure crumbled to dust, revealing a new passage behind it. Gunnar gripped Bjorn's arm. "What was all that about losing pieces of your soul? Bjorn, what aren't you telling me?" Bjorn sighed heavily. "The power we wield, Gunnar, it comes at a price. Every time we shape reality with our words, we give up a part of ourselves. The greatest skalds in history, the ones who worked true wonders. They sacrificed almost everything. Gunnar's face paled. And this wellspring, what will it do to you? I don't know, Bjorn admitted, but I have to see this through. Whatever happens, my friend, know that I'm grateful for your company on this journey. Together, they made their way through twisting tunnels that seemed to defy normal geometry. Finally, they emerged into a vast cavern. At its center stood a pool of liquid light, pulsing with otherworldly power. The misty figure from the beach materialized beside the pool. You have come far, Bjorn Sturkerson. Now comes your final choice. Drink from the wellspring and you will gain power beyond imagining. Every word you speak will reshape reality itself. But the cost... The figure paused. The cost is the last shred of your humanity. You will become a living vessel for skaldic might, but you will no longer be the man you once were. Bjorn stared at the shimmering pool, feeling its pull. With that power, he could bring peace to warring nations, end famine and disease, perhaps even challenge the gods themselves. But at what cost? He thought of his father, of the village he'd left behind. He thought of Gunnar, and all the friends he'd made on his journey. Could he give them up for the sake of power? Even power used for good? Taking a deep breath, Bjorn stepped back from the pool. No, he said firmly. The price is too high. Our humanity, our connections to each other, that's what gives our words true power. I'll find another way to make a difference in this world. The misty figure seemed to smile. Wisely chosen, young skald. Not all who come here have the strength to refuse. You have proven yourself worthy of the gift you bear. With a gesture, the figure opened a portal of swirling light. Go now and use your power wisely. Remember always the truths you have learned here. As Bjorn and Gunnar stepped through the portal, finding themselves back on the beach where their ship waited, Gunnar clapped him on the shoulder. You did the right thing, my friend, the big warrior said gruffly, though I'll admit a small part of me wonders what it would have been like to have a god for a drinking companion. Bjorn laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. Trust me, Gunnar, you're much better company than any god I've met. As they set sail, leaving the mist-shrouded island behind, Bjorn gazed back at the looming shape of Helgafjell. He had come seeking ultimate power, and found instead a deeper understanding of the gift he already possessed. The journey ahead was uncertain, but he faced it now with clear eyes and an untroubled heart. The skald's true power, he realized, lay not in reshaping the world, but in touching the hearts of those around him. And that was a gift worth more than all the magic in the 9 worlds. The longship crested a wave, and Bjorn's heart sank. Where once stood proud villages and bustling ports, now only smoldering ruins remained. The coastline of his homeland was a patchwork of devastation, testament to the chaos that had engulfed the land in his absence. By the gods, Gunnar breathed, his normally gruff voice tinged with shock. What happened here? Bjorn shook his head, his eyes scanning the shore for any sign of life. I don't know, my friend, but I fear we've returned to a land at war. As they drew closer to the beach, a horn sounded from the tree line. Figures emerged from the shadows, weapons glinting in the fading light. Hold, a familiar voice called out. State your business or taste Danish steel. Bjorn stepped to the prow, his hands raised. We come in peace. I am Bjorn Sturkerson, returned from... Bjorn? The voice's owner stepped forward, lowering his spear. Is it truly you? Recognition dawned on Bjorn's face. Halfdan? What are you doing so far from our village? Halfdan, once a gangly youth, now stood as a hardened warrior. His face was grim as he helped beach the longship. There is no village anymore, Bjorn. Not since the Skogar clan allied with the foreign invaders. We're all that's left of the old guard. As Bjorn and his crew were led to a hidden encampment deep in the forest, the full extent of the disaster became clear. Rival clans, sensing weakness in King Harald's rule, had turned on each other. Foreign warriors drawn by the promise of plunder had joined the fray, and beneath it all, whispers of dark magic and ancient evils awakened. In a makeshift war council, Bjorn listened, as the surviving jarls and warriors debated their next move. The air was thick with desperation and barely contained fear. "We should sue for peace," one elderly jarl argued. "We cannot hope to stand against such forces." "Peace?" another spat. "There can be no peace with those who would destroy everything we hold dear. We fight to the last man." Bjorn stood, his voice cutting through the clamor. "Before we decide anything, I need to know everything. Tell me of these dark forces you've mentioned." A hush fell over the gathering. Finally, a one-eyed warrior stepped forward. "They call themselves the Nameli, the Unspeakable Ones. They appeared in the wake of the first battles, offering power to those who would serve them. Men who accept their bargain gain terrible strength, but lose their very souls in the process." Bjorn felt a chill run down his spine, remembering the truths he'd learned on the cursed island. "And their leaders? What do you know of them?" The one-eyed warrior shook his head. "They are seldom seen, but there are rumors of a dark skald among them, one whose words can raise the dead and shatter mountains." A murmur of fear rippled through the gathering. Bjorn's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of prophecy and legend he'd encountered on his travels. Could it be that all of this had been foretold? Before he could voice his thoughts, a commotion erupted at the edge of the camp. A scout burst into the clearing, his face pale with terror. "They're coming," he gasped. "A great host unlike anything I've ever seen. The Nameli march at their head." Panic threatened to overtake the gathering, but Bjorn's voice rang out, infused with the power he'd honed through his journeys. "Stand fast, sons of Denmark, daughters of the North. Though darkness gathers, our light shall not dim. In unity lies strength, in courage our shield. Together we'll face the storm and prevail." As he spoke, a change came over the assembled warriors. Backs straightened, eyes hardened with resolve. The despair that had threatened to consume them was burned away by the fire of Bjorn's words. Gunnar stepped to Bjorn's side, a wry smile on his scarred face. "Nicely done, poet. But pretty words won't be enough against what's coming. We need a plan." Bjorn nodded, his mind already racing ahead. "Gather everyone who can fight. We make our stand at Ravenholt, the Raven's Wood. The old magic is strong there. It may give us the edge we need." As the camp erupted into frenzied preparation, Bjorn sought out a quiet spot to center himself. He knew that the coming battle would test him as never before. The power he wielded was great, but so too was the responsibility. Dawn broke blood red over Ravenholt. Bjorn stood at the forefront of their ragtag army, Gunnar at his side. Before them stretched a sea of enemies, rival clansmen, foreign mercenaries, and at their center, the dark figures of the Nameli. A figure stepped forward from the enemy ranks, his voice carrying unnaturally across the battlefield. "Bjorn Sturkerson, I've waited a long time for this moment." Bjorn's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the speaker. "Halvard. But how?" The former royal skald smiled, but there was no warmth in it. His eyes glowed with an eldritch light. "I've transcended the limitations of mortal skalds, Bjorn. I've tasted true power. Join us, and you can too. Together we could reshape the very world." Bjorn felt the pull of that power, remembering the temptation he'd faced at the wellspring, but he also remembered the cost. "Never," he called back. "The price is too high, Halvard. You've lost yourself." Halvard's face contorted with rage. "Then you'll die with the rest of these fools." He raised his arms, beginning a dark chant that made the very air shudder. Bjorn knew he had to act fast. He began to weave his own verse, calling upon every scrap of knowledge and power he'd gained. "Odin Allfather, lend thy wisdom, Thor Thunderer, grant thy might. Tyr the brave, guide our sword arms. Freya the fair, bless our fight. From roots of Yggdrasil, power rising, through Skald's voice, let magic flow. Shield our hearts from darkness' touch and strike our foes with righteous blow." As Bjorn's voice rose to a crescendo, a blinding light erupted from the ground beneath their feet. The runes carved into the ancient trees of Ravenholt blazed to life, forming a protective barrier around their forces. The battle that followed was like nothing out of mortal legend. Halvard's dark verses called forth abominations from nightmare, while Bjorn's words empowered their warriors with the strength of heroes. The clash of steel was punctuated by thunderous invocations as the two skalds dueled with word and will. Through it all, Bjorn could feel the terrible cost of each verse. With every word of power, he felt a piece of himself slip away, but he pushed on, driven by the knowledge that failure meant the end of everything he held dear. As the sun began to set, the tide of battle finally turned. Halvard's forces, for all their supernatural might, began to falter in the face of the defenders' unbreakable resolve. With a final desperate verse, Bjorn shattered the dark skald's defenses. Halvard fell to his knees, the eldritch light fading from his eyes. "How?" he gasped. "I had all the power in the world at my command." Bjorn approached his fallen foe, his own voice hoarse from hours of magical exertion. "Power isn't everything, Halvard. The strength of a true skald comes from the bonds we share, the stories we tell. You forgot that, and it was your undoing." As the remaining enemies fled or surrendered, a great cheer went up from the defenders. They had done the impossible. They had saved their homeland from the brink of destruction. But victory had come at a terrible price. As the euphoria of battle faded, Bjorn felt the full weight of what he'd sacrificed. His connection to the mortal world felt tenuous, as if he stood with one foot in the realm of gods and spirits. Gunnar approached, his face etched with concern. "Bjorn, are you all right?" Bjorn managed a weak smile. "I'll live, old friend, but I'm not the same man I was. The power I wielded today, it's changed me." In the days that followed, as the land began the slow process of healing, Bjorn found himself restless. He could feel the call of something greater, a destiny that stretched beyond the borders of Denmark. On the eve of his departure, he stood with Gunnar at the edge of the sea, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "You're really leaving, then?" Gunnar asked, though he already knew the answer. Bjorn nodded. "I have to. There's so much more to learn, so many wrongs to right. The gift I bear, it comes with a responsibility I'm only beginning to understand." Gunnar clapped him on the shoulder. "Well then, poet, I suppose this is farewell. Try not to get yourself killed out there. Who else would I drink with?" Bjorn laughed, feeling a bittersweet ache in his chest. "Take care of them, Gunnar. Our people will need strong leaders in the days to come." As Bjorn's ship disappeared into the mists, Gunnar stood watching long after it had faded from view. He knew somehow that the tales of Bjorn Sturkerson were far from over. The god-touched skald had only just begun his true journey, and in taverns and mead halls across the land, a new verse began to spread. Of Bjorn the skald, the tales are told, whose words could shake the heavens bold. Through darkness deep and battle's roar, he saved our land and so much more. But restless was his poet's heart, and so from us he did depart. To realms unknown, with verse and deed, the god-touched skald's great quest proceeds.